You can tell him to join. I mean, whatever you want, dude.
Okay. I told him we would be doing this. Maybe I'll send him the link or something. So how's it going?
Thank God, doing well. Doing well. My wife has some friends in from the States, so she is out, and hence I'm here. I have the night.
Yeah.
I've been enjoying our interactions when we seem to cross paths on in this little corner. So when you asked to speak, I was happy to say yes, of course.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I've been wanting to talk to you for a while just to get to know you better and stuff. Yeah, it seems like it's always kind of hit or miss. Maybe some of it's a time zone too. I don't know. There, I can see better now.
Yeah, I mean, like usually, like I my free time really kicks in around if it's 2:30 by you or 2:30 by you, so around like 2 o'clock your time, and I could usually run pretty late. I mean, it depends. There's nights that I'm working very late, so it changes.
Yeah. So you at your office right now?
No, right now, I'm sorry. I'm actually in the playroom right now. I'm not in the office right now.
Nice.
Though the kids are down relatively early, so I do work from home, but there's times I do work from the office as well, and I'll do some chats there also if I can.
How old are your kids? If you don't, I mean, you don't have to share that on the internet,
My
I guess.
oldest, I have three kids. My oldest is going to be turning 9. Then one's going to be turning 7, and my daughter's going to be turning 2.
Okay. Dang. Yeah. So you still got a really little one. Nice.
Yeah, so she's an amazing addition, and it's also a girl, which it's it's just different, and I'm super excited about it. I was very happy. To be honest, having children is like one of the most amazing gifts in the world. I did have a concern. I don't know if it was a concern, but my thought process was, my wife and I got married, and while I see us turning into one unit, and then like together we could reach higher levels. All that being true, there was a bifurcation of Chezi, right? Like there was like, okay, now I'm getting married, and like that let's say development of just that individual sort of stops at that point. And then we're doing this together as a couple, and then we had another kid, so that's another bifurcation, and then we had another kid. So I was thinking to myself, and I was telling her, I'm like, this is this version of me that and we have kids, and that requires patience and aggravations, and then so are you happy with this model? Because if we keep on I might get more, so I was thinking about number 3, but I couldn't be happier that we did that. Obviously, thank God, with the grace of God. Even though 3, I have the rest of my siblings have a lot more kids, which is more in common with religious. I think with religious people in general, but specifically modern Orthodox Jews.
Is it Orthodox? Is it? I mean, do they even use birth control? Is that the reason why, or no?
No, yeah. Okay, so the Haredi, the ultra Orthodox, it's less common to use birth control, even though it is something that is possible or is done. In the modern Orthodox community, which I guess I would be considered a part of, it's changed over the years. It's funny when I talk about it with like my older siblings, like from let's say the 80s to now. It used to be, maybe wait a year, and then like that's it. And over the years that's sort of changed due to the fact that one, let the couple get married. Well, I'll have to take a step back. Part of the issues are when one starts dating in the religious community, there are relatively strict obligations with regards to, or restrictions with regards to physical contact with the other sex. So if you are dating and you're really into this girl, So you're going to have to make a decision. Am I marrying her or not? So that means like, okay, so I really shouldn't be dating her at 16 because it's definitely not going to happen at 16 that I'm marrying this girl. So you end up having couples that by the age of 20, 21, they're like, okay, we gotta we're getting married. And then the attitude was like, well, if we're just telling them, okay, get married and now have kids, they're maybe ready to be married. They're definitely not parent material yet. So there was people being more lenient with that regard, like let them wait longer until they have children. Ultimately, though, it's not really a question rabbis should be interesting themselves with actively. Rather, if the couple decides to include the rabbi in that intimate setting, then I mean, like you're welcome to have like a conversation, but it's not like you don't hear people going about it and constantly talking about it. It's just it's something that can be done. It also sort of relates to abortion as well, which is that also can be done, but it's just not something that's championed or pushed or like rah rah, which is like sort of crazy what's going on in the States. However, it is a tool at one's disposal.
Okay, so it's allowed even in Orthodox Judaism.
Yes.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic.
Depending, Ben Shapiro, for example, a character that I'm assuming you're aware of or know that.
Yeah.
Individual.
I haven't listened to him in a long time, but I'm aware of
all
him.
Good. He's pretty strict. He's pretty strict on that. He's pretty intense on abortion. So I would say like he doesn't necessarily represent. While the sentiment is true, which is like we want to make sure that we're valuing properly life, and we believe that it starts at conception. That being said, there are periods where you could do it, and there are the health of the mother is definitely taken into consideration. So the Orthodox community has evolved with that regard.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated issue than a lot of people, I think, usually confront it with. I don't know, but
yes and no. It depends. It's only complicated like if you grow up in a certain context, it becomes less complicated because those are sort of the rules of the game. So if in the States, if like the concepts of freedom and you hear a lot about rights in the States, like these are my rights. Rights come with obligations, right? Like it's people get like you're a citizen, that means something.
Yeah.
So people forget that sometimes, and then once these terms become very gray, it's very hard, I think, it starts getting more difficult to have that conversation, which specifically is true in the States right now, which even the term nuance is considered like a trigger term, right? Like if you're saying nuance, that means like you have another agenda.
I didn't know this.
So
I'm probably out of the loop on a lot of this stuff, man.
I think that's healthier.
It might be. I don't know. Who knows? So what I was going to ask you too, what do you normally like to talk about? Anyway, did you have anything on the agenda for today, or is there?
I had nothing specific. I was sort of going to roll with things you had, things that were interest of you, and then see where we go from there.
That's kind of what I was thinking as well. What's normally is there something like topics you normally find more interesting though, or?
Well, and specifically in this little corner, the conversation is usually theology mixed with philosophy, sprinkled with psychology on top. So those are always
it's a perfect way to describe it. It's a good
interesting, fun, and really enjoyable conversations. So I'm still. There was like a week, maybe a little over a week, where there was like a lot of like focus on this little corner, and there was a lot of conversation of like, what are we doing? What are we talking? People talking and people helping people. So like, while that's all true, while I could still think about that, sort of what is the space that's being that's developing in front of us, I do think it's not always healthy to just like constantly talk about that and focus on that, just because I think it just becomes like very cyclical at that point.
Yeah.
I, having said that, it is an interesting space for me. Specifically, I think Jews are the minority on like, this in this little corner. So it's just a very interesting space. It's not a space that I really, ever stepped into. And it's also it really in some ways is like an adventure, because there's a lot of uh, terms and ideas that sort of I have insular, or I have like inside my own community, that are not really things that I've ever discussed. I didn't see myself having a discussion or with people about, like, what Jacob thinks, like with regards to Christians, and then like going back and forth on that. It was never part of the agenda, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Jacob throws me into some tailspins for sure. Those are probably some of the most fruitful conversations I think I've had, though. But they definitely are he gives me some questions that are really, really hard to wrestle with, for sure. But that's what I think. That's one things I like that's going on, like you're talking about. It's this space that's opened up where a lot of different ideas and thoughts are kind of colliding and mixing together. Like I like your description of the theology mixed with, was it philosophy, psychology sprinkled on.
psychology.
Yeah. Like that's like a cocktail, and you drink that, and it's gonna really mess with your head.
It goes down smooth. I do feel like this. Again, I feel it's a very healthy space, and I'm not trying to be too over the top, but these conversations, to me, in a certain sense, I see them like in a prophetic context. So like I just see this is, this was never happening before. And you'd be like, well, it's the internet. I don't know. I just don't think at the time it could be like, the world wasn't ready for it yet. And it's still very small. And this differs from like interfaith dialogue, because I do think, and I sound like a broken record when I say that it's like not a safe space, it's a brave space. I still think it's a space that people feel safe in, but it's a brave space because I really think people are being challenged. And like Jacob is a great example of that, where you could come and say like, oh yeah, no, it's like, a Discord where people are just like stroking each other's egos. Like Jacob is not stroking anyone's ego, and there's no problem telling you like, so like you're living life, you're in hell. So
yeah,
it's very. So I think that allows it to be very real, and really makes people step up to the plate in a certain extent, both with their own belief, with their belief with others, with their belief between them and God. And I would think that it's a net positive. Everyone is sort of rising up to the challenge, so to speak, because people are spending a lot of time doing this. Now, I rationalize it to myself by saying that these conversations are me getting to know God better, wrestle with God, and that is what we're supposed to be doing day to day, all day.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I definitely don't find this like as a waste of time. I find it very, very enjoyable. There are conversations that sometimes feel very spiritual, where there's like a lot of depth into them, and you could sometimes get that sense, which a lot of people had, I think, when they were listening to Jordan Peterson for the first time. It was like, I don't know what this guy's saying, but like, I like it. Like, I'm hooked in, or just like, that's exactly what I was thinking, but like, he just spelled it out. So I think in a lot of these conversations, that sort of happens, where people are just sort of going along with the conversation, and they don't have to say much. They're like, oh, that is what I think, and that's interesting. And you can see it in the comments. But I do think that that it's a very healthy space. And going back to what I was saying about it being prophetic, this is sort of where I don't know where we diverge or converge, but it's interesting to me sort of where this goes to. Like for me, this space has allowed me to more clearly define, or try to define, how I see the other religions in relation to Judaism or Jews. And it made things more clear to me with regards to how it could look like. What is us praying together in how to prayer for all the nations, what that looks like, or get like a little taste of that. And I feel some of that taste is like here. I could imagine a service that is very enlightening and spiritual to a lot of people, and then you go off to the markets and people are sitting down and drinking coffees and teas, and there's just like a theological, philosophical conversation happening around just this beautiful shared space of people, resonating and feeling the oneness sort of between them and God, when his name will be one. So I also mentioned this, that the Shema is usually seen as like the the creed, like, Jews being monotheistic just by saying like, "Hear, O Israel," So, however, I think it's better seen as like a mission statement, which is, at that time when we said it for the first time, we recognize that God is our God, not like the other gods. And we are supposed to keep on saying that and bear witness until everyone sees it as one. And I think the world has gone, like, I think the Muslim world has done a very good job making sure people know that Allah is one. And there's a lot to that. Like, I think in Kabbalah, they talk about that between the different spheres, that Judaism is the center or the middle, which is Tiferet, and to its right and to its left, there's Din and Chesed, so justice and righteousness and grace, and there are some Kabbalists that say that Islam represents a justice to an extreme, and Christianity represents grace to an extreme, and both need to be basically like tethered back towards the center. But the reason I mention that is because even it's very clear that in our own scriptures there is a place for the Christian, and there are place for other religions. There are place for other frequencies. So this corner has been illuminating that, and I think is a real manifestation, even if in a very small version or a microcosm of that, of what that could look like.
Yeah, I completely agree. It feels like there's something extremely satisfying about that too, when you start to see the things come together, and people come together, and different ideas come together. It's kind of strange too, because there's this weird way where I haven't necessarily found that I've had to sacrifice any beliefs per se. Maybe certain, like, I guess, creeds or something. I don't know, some sort of like, that's one thing. But that's one thing that kind of frustrates me about certain Christian circles, as well as like the propositions I'm required to affirm that I don't necessarily even understand. Which I'm like, I'm okay with faith, because I'm never going to understand anything anyway. So I get that. But then having to wrestle with those has been a challenge, but I think it's been fruitful, and it's been in this space, I think, where I've had to do a lot of that. And the hard part too is like, it's usually in situations like this where it's live too, so it's harder to, it's easier to wrestle, I think, with those things when you're in your own head and you're not having other people. I guess I shouldn't say it's easier, but I don't know what I'm getting at exactly. It's more helpful, I think, when you have other people there to kind of help you work out your thoughts with you. But it's harder, I think, to in the moment. It's hard to switch, I guess, or I don't know. Switch isn't the right word, but I think you kind of know what I'm getting at.
I would say I would agree with you that when you are having these conversations with with yourself, right? It doesn't require you to a certain extent to make a decision, right? These ideas, these plates are spinning in your head, and they're bouncing off. Maybe having these kind of conversations, ultimately the next word needs to come out of my mouth, right? So like decisions are happening. I think that is, you are creating then your own sort of hierarchy of the decisions and the thoughts you have, then they're coming out. And I would argue that if you are attentive to that, you could notice that, like, okay, I am making a decision. Like, I'm saying one and I'm not saying two, because like this is what I think I believe. But like in a certain way, a conversation like this forces you to express yourself. And I think that could be very fruitful. However, that being said, even soul searching and having these conversations with yourself, I wonder how much of that is done host these conversations, how much people really sit and reflect on that. So we know Paul does, right? Because Paul somehow magically has a movie, a clip about the next day where he's like breaking down the conversation that he had 2 years ago with so he's clearly thinking about this.
Mhm.
But and this is a practice. I'm going left field over here, but this is a practice I have. I one of my vices. I don't drink any alcohol, but one of my vices is marijuana, and it's very different now than when it was when I was 20. Getting high and going on an adventure, which is a lot of fun for sure. And having said that, at this age, which is not so old, at 36, my experience with that is more to get in a mindset or a place where I'm more calm, more open, and then try to really be aware of where I am at that spot. And when, not high, quote unquote, try to return there, but come back there from a natural space and really go back to those sort of spaces. So even in a conversation like this, many times, or that I've had in this little corner, I'll write down some notes or I'll take little snippets. And obviously you could do that with clips of time, but I just think there's a lot to that, because sometimes you might, our next conversation, you might say, I thought about what I said and it actually didn't make any sense. Now you could be like, you know what, who cares? It's here today, gone tomorrow, it's out there. And it could be that it doesn't matter. But
yeah. Well, it's tough. I mean, it's interesting because you feel like you're kind of, I mean, I don't know if you experienced this or not. And sorry if I sound really scattered too. There's a couple questions that I've been kind of wrestling with where I kind of right now I feel kind of in this weird in between space.
bring it up.
But there's I feel like in this space in particular, there's a lot of that going on because you're crossing different religions, different cultures, all of that is happening. So then even taking these things back, there's I don't talk theology at all with outside of these circles. And it's not that I wouldn't, it's just that people don't. I don't know why. Even at my church, people don't necessarily talk theology as much. We go to church, sit and have a sermon, then people go out to eat and they'll talk about whatever else. But so then when I get into these conversations, I find out just how heretical I actually am usually. And so I'm just man, am I even Christian anymore? Because they're you should. Well, wait, you don't think this, Jason? And I'm no, I don't know that I do. I don't know. But the one thing I find extremely comforting, personally, and that I have found in this space, especially with Jacob too, is just the love for the scriptures, and that's one thing. Even, I mean, that's usually what I base all. I mean, I would think that's what I base all my beliefs off of, and they seem to map on. It maps, and I have said this before. The reason is because the scriptures, the Torah, all that stuff it seems to map onto reality, and it shows those patterns that are actually applicable to life, and you see them. It's not just that they're written, it's that I see them out in front of me everywhere. And so it's just, and so having this love for the scriptures is kind of what my beliefs, I guess I've built them off of. And then come to find out, I have some people saying well, you're probably, I feel like I'm not a Christian half the time, but then I'm well, I still love Jesus. I still believe in Jesus, still believe in all those things. But then at the same time, I'm I hear Jacob and you talk about Judaism, and I'm this sounds almost exactly what I near almost exactly what I believe about Christianity. There might be a few slight differences, but
a man or two.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know, because even talking about stuff, I mean, I haven't really hit it too hard with Jacob, I guess, but even talking about the Trinity and stuff, I've tried to explain him what I think about that, and it sounds like it's similar to what, not what he believes, because he wouldn't use that term, because the phrase is so damaging, is what I think he would say, but the way it comes together is just a unity of multiplicity, and how there's something like a divine Trinity, is I think what I would say. That's something like the spirit of forgiveness or unconditional love that unifies all things together. And so that is you have two things, and then they're held together by this love. And so it's those, but those are these really, really like these big hiccups or something. And then when I get into the particulars of it, I'm like, I don't really think we see this differently or something. But then at the same time, I'm like, I don't think that's how most Christians see it. So I'm like, well, where am I at now? You know, like, I don't know. All
So
I
I
can
think
say is
that's
I'm in the deep end somewhere. I don't know.
so. I mean, first of all, I think it's fun in the deep end. That's where you get to swim. And uh, how what I'm thinking of what's the translation is in English, but like from the depth I call to you, mima amakim karaticha. So like there's a sense of when I mentioned this on a little Voxer group I was at that one needs to lose himself to find God in a certain extent, and I think this kind of space is definitely a space where that kind of guided loss or losing oneself could happen. And I think you just said that when I have these conversations, I feel like most Christians don't think that way. So I think if you decide to go back to the earlier Sufis and to the earlier readings of the Quran or earlier readings, like we find that now, like Jonathan Peugeot comes out of nowhere and starts like telling people about all these church fathers that like for some reason no one knew about, and even in Judaism, there's a robust conversation sort of with dealing with the other religions and our Christian brothers. However, for a very long time, due to political reasons and cultural reasons, those conversations were pushed to the side or censored in many cases. And we're talking about, it doesn't matter if you are a tiny little community rabbi or you are as great as Maimonides, who has the name as the Great Eagle. And he too was censored when he had his conversations about how he sees Christianity and Islam as path makers for the Messiah. So I do think ultimately that the conversation is a lot more similar. However, it does require a deep conversation and walking together in a path where both specifically Christians and Jews, but also Muslims, have to have a real conversation with looking at one another and looking in the mirror and sort of seeing what exactly represents us. And I think in this corner, you could see a lot of these layers are sort of being removed where and now you're saying, but I'm talking to other people and they're still with a lot of layers on. So when they hear me talk, this stripped version that Jason's talking about Christianity, like, that's not our game. On one hand, we have to be able to hold that and be like, okay. And this goes to like the Jacob conversation about, destroying Martin Luther and the whole, so we need to be able to hold these vessels that people congregated around because they're potentially too valuable to just swat away. Mm-hmm. However, they do require landing. Okay. We do need to bring this ship down to a certain extent and be like, okay, like now can we start sifting what we really believe, what we're actually talking about? So an example would be, is while there could be versions of the Trinity that work with, which you could then interpret as these are breakoffs or different interpretations of Kabbalistic terms that have sort of gone array, got sort of lost in translation at a certain point. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's different versions of the Trinity. It depends if you're looking at it sort of, and there's actual practical ramifications for a Jew's relationship with a Christian, or specifically with how one sees them. Because if someone like Sam, who, if I understand correctly, doesn't necessarily see the Trinity as, all one, but really it all stems from the Father, then that is a much more, that relationship blends much better or fits much better with Judaism with that regard. And definitely even at the point where the terminology is still the Father and the Son, Judaism, as far as if your recognition is that it stems from the Father, your relationship with the Son to a certain extent could still be accepted. I just see a little note over here from Nate. I know he's watching us. So the Jewish Messiah will not be a man, but man, what Christians call Messiah. Christ is not the Messiah for Jews who are already in God's family. Okay, so this also relates to, again, this sort of helps the relationship between Jews and Christians, which is the Vatican, in 2015 coming out saying that Jews do not require salvation through Jesus, through Christ, which is like a big move on the Vatican to come out and say that, because I think everyone needs salvation through Christ. Apparently not the Jews. But I think all those are data points of a growing relationship together.
Yeah. Well, okay, so here's the question. Wouldn't everybody need salvation through Christ? Because you were just mentioning mirrors and talking to one another. And okay, so here's something I'll throw out there. Basically, you could probably classify me as a universalist at some point. So, and when I'm thinking about salvation now, it would be something like God being all in all, everything being reconciled back to God, everything and every person. So in that way, even if Christ was the last one, it's like somehow everybody, I mean, he's still a person. He still has the Imago Dei, so he'd have to be included in some degree.
You mean the character of, like, the historical man Jesus?
Yeah, just like
Yeah,
the
so sure.
every person. Like I don't think
no problem. Yes, so
like
yes, but I was mentioning this earlier. There's a term with it's called late atar panui mine. There's no space that's void of you. And everything is basically God from that point. So like at that end, yes, like we could all we're all part of that large picture.
I'm not trying to like trick you into Christianity or anything.
No.
I'm not. I'm basically saying, like, and I guess to my point I'm making too is like I don't necessarily see salvation without you being there either. So like in any way that there's a divide between me and you, and we are not unified to some degree or reconciled to one another, then I don't think I ultimately have salvation, because you are as much a part of God as I am, and so I would not see the face of God. I could not see the face of God without seeing your face also included in that. At least that's where I've come to believe now. But
No,
like
Martin Buber talks about similar terms about the I thou and like the conversation between the two people. And there's in the Talmud there's a conversation that the Holy Spirit, the Shekhinah, rests between two individuals. Well, they start from 10 and they bring it all the way down to two people, because that you recognize the other as yourself. You could see God's image in him and in you, and so that's obviously could be very powerful. I would say that
is that a normal, like, because you just mentioned someone I'm not familiar with, is that a normal Jewish belief, that idea of seeing
yes.
God? Okay.
Yes.
I don't necessarily see that.
I think it's yes, it's a Jewish belief. Is it practiced? Do people walk around every day like I recognize the other? So the answer is no, they don't do that. Like I've mentioned in this corner that even like a purely wicked person, one should try to identify some good in him, because if you identify some good in him, you could elevate him. Like the attitude is always try to attempt to see the best in the other, try to see the divine in the other. And we're always in a certain way sort of like a hopeless optimist, because even if I see like we had elections in Israel which were like very, very problematic, or even the state of the world right now, I see that as shattered vessels that have a divine spark in them, and this is opportunity. It's opportunity to elevate, to bring out the good, the potential that's inside here. So, and I obviously find these kind of conversations very fruitful, because it's there's a lot less shattered vessel and there's a lot more divine. So it's much easier to see these kind of conversations. But I would say, ironically, a lot of the tension that we had with our Christian brothers, starts with the Talmud having a discussion whether or not Gentiles can have a place in the world to come and could be find salvation. And there is there is a split within the two schools of thought of the Shammai school of thought and the Hillelian school of thought. At this time, there are some that identify Hillel and some others of his group as part of the Essenes group. And to make a long story short, Beit Shammai at the time is sort of calling the shots, politically speaking and religiously speaking. And their attitude is that the Gentile cannot find salvation, basically. And the Hillelian school of thought, and which Jesus comes from, potentially, again, these are some theories, or this is like at least the context that was brought up to me, that that their attitude was, for the Gentile to be worthy of salvation, he needs to take on the 7 Noahide laws. And to do so, there was an intention to create a religion that is going to service to the Gentiles. And originally speaking, Jesus, potentially Paul, go out, and that is the original mission, which is, where this stems out from. And then there's sort of like a break from that down the line, and now we have what we have today. But my thought, so I was just going to say, like, Judaism's attitude is always, generally speaking, trying to bring in salvation and include the other. Within Israel, within the 5 books, you have like clearly a lot of focus on the land of Israel, but you also have a lot of focus on that's called the Ger Toshav. You have the Gentile living within the land, that is something that Judaism is aware of, and not only aware of, sees as a value and sees as something that's always going to be there. Like, you always have to be dealing with the other. And we know King David comes from the other, and Ruth. So like, we always have like this, this mix together with the other, which allows us to really grow, I think, as a nation. So yes, it's prevalent in Judaism. And I was going to say, like, my introduction to Jesus, like growing up, was a rabbi, a Pharisite. Just to be clear, at the time when Jesus is going out bashing the Pharisees in the New Testament, the attitude is that he is really speaking to the Shammai school of thought and not the Hillelian school of thought that ultimately ended up winning the general argument, and most of the Talmud and the Jewish law continued through his ways, which seemingly were also sometimes more lenient. But I would say that was my framing of Jesus, as just like a good dude that got in over his head, I guess, off the bat. But the conversation was always together. Now, that's always difficult for me to have that little kernel of, let's say, potential historical information in my head, because that could sound very demeaning, obviously, to Christians, being like, well, it's really this, like, this flip situation. And that's why I developed it into, even if that's true, I ultimately think that, we live in God's world, and wouldn't it be nice if we're the chosen religion, or you're the chosen religion, God would give us a world where we don't have to deal with any other religions. But ultimately, there are other religions over here. There are other people over here. There are other people that have their stories. So ultimately, it's all divine, and we're all getting to witness God, through history. So even the development of Christianity, and this is what Rav Yaakov Emden says, who's a prominent rabbi. He says that Christianity has done 2 great services to the world. One, it has completely elevated the status of the world as far as with regards to morality across the whole globe. And secondly, that no rabbi has spoken about God nearly as much as Jesus did. So you can't take that away from the Christians, because and that relates to what I was saying about the Muslims, that they definitely take God as one very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Don't draw their prophet.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if I went on a little rant over there, but
yeah. No, I think that was good. It's I'd like to actually get into some more conversations with people in the Muslim belief as well. I haven't actually spoken to any, although
Sure.
I'm not very good at using Discord. I've been on the Discord for a long time, but I don't do hardly anything on there. So, but I'd like to get some of that viewpoint as well, because I think they definitely have done that for sure. And yeah, it's just kind of interesting because even like you said, you were talking about your what you knew of Christianity growing up and what you were told about it and stuff. And it's kind of the same thing for me when I was growing up. Like I would hear about Judaism, and it was usually always presented as a very works-based religion. Like you do enough good deeds, you kind of get to heaven or something like that. I don't know why it was described that way. That's just kind of how it was presented. Maybe it has something to do with the epistles, with like Jacob likes to throw rocks at a lot. But so it's probably, I don't know that I don't think it necessarily has as much to do with that as maybe just people's interpretations of them. So that's kind of what I've been, I guess, pleasantly surprised to get in these conversations and find out all the commonalities and the common ground. And it's just sorry, I just saw Nate's comment. Nate,
Funny, right? This is not a joke, but from the age of 11 or so, I wanted to be a Jew. Well, if you ask Santa, maybe he'll grant your wish. It's funny what you said about the like on Rosh Hashanah, the New Year. So like when and building up to the Day of Atonement of Yom Kippur, we say that kids learn that this is a time to do, ask for forgiveness and do good deeds, because we're all like, basically we all see ourselves as sort of, it's called like in the middle, and like we're our weight basically could go either way, and like you need to make sure you repent and you do good deeds. And I would always like ask the teacher, I'm like, wouldn't it make just more sense forget the repenting and just do like a lot more good deeds for those 10 days, and I'll just like tip the scales. I'll just like do like a blitz of just like walking my grandmother across the street, whether she wants to or not. We're crossing, we're going.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a lot more of through and through, fully embedded. There's if you don't mind, there's a quote. I actually been quoting a lot of him recently, but there's a quote from, well, actually no, this is not Rav Kook. This is Heschel, but I'm trying to look for it. But it's okay. This is one of the goals of the Jewish way of living: to experience commonplace deeds as spiritual adventures, to feel the hidden love and wisdom in all things. So Judaism definitely has, and this might be controversial. Not all Orthodox Jews would agree with this, that the commandment or the mitzvot, the 613, these are an operating system, but these are not. I mean, that's not what the story's about. The story's not about the sacrifice you bring or the blue fringes that I'm wearing, or it's not about that. It's really about the relationship with God and relationship with the other. However, seemingly a successful way to do that is to put yourself inside or put on your little Jewish Oculus and then live life through that. So even the mundane could seem like an adventure. And while we know what we just said earlier, like Leita Tarpanumine, like there's no space that's void of God, right? So I don't have to put on my Oculus. Like I know it's all God. However, it's difficult for me to look at a rock and be like, oh wow, that's God, or oh wow, this bark is God. However, if built into my religion is, if you didn't see the ocean in 30 days, you make a blessing. If you hear thunder, you make a blessing. If you hear lightning, if you see lightning, you make a blessing. If you see a king, if you see a genius, like it's the experience is you're being told experience, right? So, and make a blessing for that. Now that could become sort of, as a father, I have to tell my kids like, okay, wake up in the morning, remember to, there's a ritual, right? So they're waking up, they're brushing their teeth, cleaning their face, and they're washing their hands because, well, they wake up first, and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, thank you, God, for returning my soul. And, And you're thanking for that. They're going to the bathroom, they're washing their hands, they go eat, they wash their hands, they make a blessing. What are you eating right now? So are you eating this? So it's very annoying. But I always give an example to the Buddhist. The Buddhist monk who rubs his food before he eats it is also trying to orient himself through a similar technology. Mm-hmm. So my son is just, it's annoying, and like he mumbles it. I'm like, I didn't hear what you said. Say it again. And he's like, oh, he says it again. Now, you don't want to be too intense. Like my mom was like very intense about that, and I don't want to be Mr. Intense about that. However, in a world today where you feel like, people are just, every day there's a new thing you're scrolling down, you're looking at, there's something very beautiful about stopping and blessing and taking it in. So I try to make it more of an experience. So like, we're going to the ocean. I'm like the master of the universe, look at these waves, and like, get them like wild up.
Yeah.
So I think those blessings and even these commandments, these are practices, which also John Vervaeke talks about, which are just very necessary. He talked about a religion that's not a religion, and like by doing so, you're still going to have to create like a congregation where people meet together in a building where people talk together and practice. So, okay, great. So like you said, it's a religion that's not a religion. So I have a religion that works pretty well. So there's a lot of commandments. Not all of them relate to men. Not all of them relate to a certain time of day. It changes by different classes. There's the priestly class. There's a Levite class. There's the Israel class. There are differences. But ultimately, I think I'm a fan of the system, even though I have critiques.
Yeah, I like it. So when you say make a blessing, it's just kind of like giving thanks, and you give thanks for. Would that be similar?
Right. So let's say for some food, it's just thank you God that that everything has been made in His creation. So you'd be you'd say that on like a popsicle. If you're gonna eat a potato, then you're gonna make it specifically that it's from the ground. If it's gonna be wheat, it's gonna be wheat.
Really?
So it's broken down, and there's so many.
Do you eat a lot of popsicles in your house or something?
No.
That's your first go-to. I can't remember the last time I had a popsicle.
Yeah, I don't know why it's fun about a popsicle. Yeah, so
no, I like it.
A Jolly Rancher, whatever.
Those are good examples. I guess anyone you go for, it might be kind of strange, Anyone.
So yeah, so there's a lot of blessings, but they are if and when you could be mindful of them, which again also it became like a term that people like to swing around, like mindfulness. Everyone needs to be mindful today. So Judaism is many times trying to do that constantly. Be mindful, be mindful, be mindful, be mindful. Stop 3 times a day and pray. Be mindful. Make a blessing and be mindful. So all these things are sort of built in they force you to behave in a certain manner. Now, the attitude is that you want to be doing this and this becomes second nature. But, if an older man walks in, then you stand up and you have to help. Like, well, now you can be like, well, that's common courtesy. The idea is like you need to do that constantly. So like all these things are built in. Then there's levels to it. Obviously, the more ultra Orthodox community they call it fencing, right? They have many fences to the actual commandment. So the actual commandment says don't do X. They're going to go like four levels more, extreme than that, just to make sure, X never happens. They're also going to say don't do these 7 things either. So you could be like, okay, they're just being protective and they're being safe. And like, it's like you did, like you went parachuting, right? So he's going to tell you this is like your security one. This is your second one. Don't do. So, okay, they have all this stuff on them and we want them to be safe. The problem is when after many years, you feel like, no, this itself, like this whole suit I have of like, or 17 fences, this is what God wanted. And this is the divine word. And then even if there's someone that decides to not go according to that fence, then he's a heretic. He's not part of the system anymore. And that's where, we're in the weeds already with, those different practices.
Yeah. There's not a lot of fences in this space, it seems like.
There's not a lot of fences in this space.
in the space that we're talking about? I guess there kind of are. I like what you said
Right, the
earlier.
differences
Back in the
between
conversation is it's good to kind of keep those, to kind of try to keep what we can. But in this space, it still seems like, yeah, it's kind of like we mentioned earlier, you're kind of off in the deep end here a little bit with all these conversations going on. But I don't know. I'm probably derailing this. Sorry.
no, not at all. So I think we're in the deep end, but I think we're still feeling. I'm trying to use this analogy a little further, take it a little further. It's I think everyone feels like it's still divine water that we're swimming in, right? So you're not like, where am I right now? However, some people realize that they need to work on their swimming method, right? It could be that, like, if you want to go deeper in, doggy paddle is not going to do it anymore. And now it's used doggy paddle as like Sunday school, right? Like you can't go into the deep end, and you definitely can't go into the ocean if you're going to be doggy paddling. So I'm saying you really got to work on your skills, which involves sometimes diving deep in, and only later coming out, like, to breathe some air. But like, down in the abyss, there's a lot going on. There's crazy little animals over there. So crazy little creatures down there.
Yeah.
So I can understand how it could be. It could be frightening, but part of me feels like if you're going in with a Bible, then you have your flashlight. Like, I get, like, you're not, maybe your verses are off, and maybe like you're confused where you're coming out. But there's a midrash that says when Jonah was in the whale, God is showing him throughout those days. He's showing him, like, different things, like, where the earth originates from, and like I could show you the footsteps of where, like, the Israelites walked. But the idea is that there's a lot of self-reflection and reflection with regards to, like, my connection to my history, to my people, to my, what does God even want for me to do? Which, just on the Jonah point, circling back to our conversation about, like, does Judaism usually do that, like, about talking to the other? Jonah is a book that we read on the Day of Atonement about a prophet that went to go save a bunch of Gentiles. Right. So, like, that is like nothing to do with Jews. And the attitude is that, like, on the Day of Atonement, the attitude is that everyone is looking for salvation, and God wants everyone to come back home.
Ah, that makes sense. I remember Jacob had told me that one was read on the Day of Atonement, and I wasn't quite sure why exactly. He probably explained it to me, and I just like talking to bricks.
However, it's not so fair, because on the Day of Atonement, everyone's fasting, and, like, usually whoever's reading that portion, it's like in the afternoon, they really want to get through it, like, really quickly. So it goes like fairly quickly. But Jonah is like a super impactful story. Just his whole relationship with God, him not understanding sort of why God is upset with him, why God would want this kind of salvation. But yes, it's definitely, the attitude is, we are definitely interested in the other, hence a house of prayer for all the nations. So much so, going to God even in the Bible, calling the Assyrians and Egypt my people, which is usually a name that's reserved for the Jews, for the Israelites. So, like, there's clearly a language of all of us coming together. I do think that for 2,000 years, Judaism really couldn't practice a lot of that kind of that version of it, because it was really on, not, let me think about how do I eventually come to this world to come where we're all one. I need to think about tomorrow, that this guy's not burning down my village, that there's not a pogrom. So, like, there was no, like, what's going to be? Even more so, the conversation was like, don't talk about that. Don't think about that. If you want to study the story of the chariot, you're only allowed to do that with one other person. And if you don't understand and you're not allowed to ask questions, like, don't get lost in, like, in Foreverland right now. Like, do the deeds, keep their tradition alive, keep on pumping. So that mode, which in a certain, I'm going too far, but like that mode, while it kept Judaism alive, it constantly had to create this exoskeleton, so the very hard exoskeleton. So to have the conversation now about, like, and our Christian brothers, we're like, the Christian Brothers? What about like this and what happened here?
Yeah.
So much so to, you have government officials today that are truly racist. I don't think they're bad people, but they're racist towards the Arabs. And you're like, that the story ends with us together. So like, why are you still like, using that language? And this is sort of the job, we have to step up to the plate, which is, I think now we finally have the opportunity to, and I mean, since the Hasmoneans, we have the opportunity now to try and develop a secularity that its basis is coming from a holy place. However, like you could still have an institute like a government and judges. So those are secular bodies, but they could be infused with proper orientation. And if we could do that, then we could start having a conversation to the other nations around us. I just think we're still not there yet. And this is a bigger conversation that Jacob and I have about Zionism, because just as Jacob requested on his server, Jacob is opposed to Zionism, and he believes that the Israeli state is not a reflection of some divine providence. However, I disagree. I don't think we're there yet. I think we have to do it. We have to actually manifest it. But I see this conversation, this particular one, but in general, in this little corner, having alongside, like, to me, I'm looking at these two different movies, right? I see this movie of like, it's surreal, because I see this movie of like my government. I'm having this conversation with them and I'm living it. And then I'm talking about that. And then I see Paul having a discussion, comments about me talking about Israel. And like, that's like this whole Christian thing of like, wow, look at what these Jews are doing. And here, look at this. There's this individual Jew right now that's trying to figure out what's going on in Israel. And I'm like, that's crazy to me that this Christian guy is talking about like what I'm thinking about, like what's going on. So to me, that's like, it's very alive. It's alive with how passionate Jacob is about it. Like all these things are indications to me that like I'm on the right path.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, this is the whole Zionism thing. I guess I can ask you. I'd like to ask you more about that. I know that was some of the stuff Craig wanted to ask you about as well, though.
Sure.
But what exactly is that? I mean, can you describe that more in detail to me? Like why Jacob is opposed to it? Because I know you guys butt heads on it, but I'm not even quite sure what it is exactly. Like why it's a.
So let's try to do it like this.
Sorry if you get asked this a lot.
Jacob and I both, I would think, and Jacob, at any point, if you're listening or later you could go on, I'm sorry if I misrepresented you. I'm a rabid Zionist. All those things. I'm wrong. So Jacob and I would both disagree with the concept of secular Zionism, which would be, in a nutshell, trying to take Europe and the West, that model of governance, and sort of copy paste on Israel, and then turn Israel into, one of the other nations around the world. Sure, we have our own little special cultural attitude, even though a lot of European Jewry tried to sort of squash a lot of that out. And make it even like more white in a certain attitude, even though I don't know if Jews classify as white, but like more. And so we would both disagree with that. And there was a lot of socialism involved in that as well. And Israel still, to a certain extent, has some socialist tendencies in it. Okay. Having said that, then there's two other schools of thought that developed from Zionism. Part of it, we have a place for the Jews. We have to keep them safe. That's very nice. Another part where it gets a little hairier is, so there's the Satmar rabbi, and he was a nationalist, okay, as in he believes in the power of the state. However, he believes that right now, like the only way the state could be empowered and you could actually have like a divine state would be as a not church and state like you have in the States, but actually a combined version of that. That can only happen through the Messiah. It really has to be like, fire and brimstone, magic happening from the skies. Like that's the only way they see that going down. However, there's a rabbi named Rav Kook, who very much also saw Israel and nationality as something very important. However, he believed that the Zionistic movement was those elements, and it was up to the Orthodox to embrace that and tries to elevate, like I was saying, these secular bodies into a higher purpose and a higher place, and then try to manifest this idea of the Jewish state. So, having said that, where we are currently, so Jacob would be in the school of thought that, yes, there could be a Jewish state. No, the one you have right now is not it. I would agree that the one I have right now is not it. However, this is what it looks like getting built. Like, it's just like we're watching the sausage being made. However, my attitude is that we could stand on the sidelines and be like, well, it's not it yet. It's not it yet. It's not it yet. Okay. And they did that for a while. There were 6 million Jews that were like killed in the Holocaust. Like, they didn't think it was it yet. They didn't want to move yet. So my attitude is it's not going to be a massive temple falling from the sky and smacking down on the Temple Rock. First of all, the amount of logistics, in that, connecting the lines, the wires, the Wi-Fi. So it's not going to be smacking down from the sky. It's going to be from us manifesting it. Now, I'm not running, which I'm sure Jacob would be tearing his hair out, metaphorically speaking. He would be saying, like, don't have any ideas of going to build this right now, like build the actual temple. So I'm not one of those people that says, like, let's run and build the Temple Mount. I've never been on the Temple Mount, even though, like, I have cousins and friends that go there. And the Western Wall, I don't see that as like necessarily as a holy place. I mean, it has value to it, but like, it was the external wall of the Temple Mount. Now that's the closest place Jews have access to, so they all pray there. But like, there was nothing magical about the Wailing Wall before, and even though some people say like that's where the Holy Spirit rests now. Either way, so I don't have any delusions of grandeur. Just I do think one has to be aware of the reality he's living in. And if, back to our conversation, if God is in everything, so it's much harder to see him in the rock. It's, to me, I see him much more clearly when I see, the history of Israel all the way till today. So I'm like, oh, wow, this clearly looks like something's going down because everyone tried to get rid of us and we're here. And then everyone said, like, they're going to not stop and we're here. Like, so it just seems like very strange to me to like, and now these Christians, like, the Pope in 67 is saying, like, you're our older brother. And the Pope in 2015 is saying, like, we don't need salvation to Christ. So, like, clearly we are here. So I see that all as, using the term Zionism, which is, again, not secular Zionism, but the movement of the development of Zion. And I see that being beneficial to us and the whole world, obviously.
So the idea with Zionism is kind of like something like it. What's the two terms? Emergence versus eminence or something like that. So it's kind of like emergence. It would go up towards it. So there already is a heavenly Jerusalem, I think, is what I'm kind of hearing. Or an ideal, I guess you could say, an ideal Jerusalem. And you would try to actually establish that on the earth and implement these earthly systems to a divine level.
Yeah. Now, where it gets nerve wracking is like, okay, so didn't you just talk about all these 613 commandments? You're going to now like smack down on the whole country, all these commandments. So the answer is no. It's like, I just think that's used as a red herring. I think it's more complicated than that. I think as seen even on this channel, whether it's Christians or Jews, clearly there's always more to learn. And I think you have a lot of what I call exile Torah, or of where you have opinions and ideas that came to the forefront, but they don't necessarily represent what the sages were talking about, or they don't, or later on we find out that that's not really the case, or even if that is the case, recognizing that you have the power to shift and change and move, which has been one of the difficulties of Islam, which is, it's submission, which is like, in Judaism, the world could the changing world is still all part of God. And that's why Judaism potentially could also change with it. Now it's gradual and one has to be very careful how that change is happening, but it's still possible. In Islam, the world needs to bend to God. So if reality is not jiving with like what your doctrine says, then like it's a problem for reality because it's going to be bent. So what is that like?
Is that extreme Islamic circles? Would you say someone? I thought I heard someone mention it wasn't you. It was in a more recent conversation I was in. Someone else was talking about is it Sufianic Islam? Is that what is that the right term? I don't know.
Sufis are actually less intense.
Oh, okay.
So
sorry, that's kind of a sideways question. I guess that's neither here nor there. Like I like everything you're talking about. It just seems yeah, that in Nate's comment over here, it seems like it's kind of related to that as well. I feel like, I mean, I know Nate and Sherry probably know a lot more about these topics than I do.
Masonic work is our work. It's not a divine rescue. We get to clean up our mess and restore the world with God's cooperation. Okay. So yes, I would agree with that. And I'm going back to like Jews and the world. So we have in our tradition that one who saves one soul as if he's saved an entire world. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the attitude is because even in that one individual and the work that's been done properly, we see all the potentiality in that.
Yeah.
So we are all constantly moving towards and becoming the redemption or the Messiah. And I mean, when God speaks to Moses in the burning bush, he says his name twice, Moses. And there's a few other individuals that get called by their name twice, but there's a gap or there's like an extra word that's added on later. The reason to this is, according to the Midrash, is we all have our heavenly version. There's heavenly Jason and there's earthly Jason. And some of this has to do with, there's a Midrash also says that when Jacob was sleeping on the rock and the angels were going up and down, angels wanted to harm him. And they said, like, who is this? And God said, like, this is Jacob. And they said, like, well, this Jacob down here doesn't look anything like the Jacob in heaven. Because, like, this Jacob just lied to his dad and tricked his brother. And the attitude is, like, we could be living up to our full potential. Back to Moses. Moses is called Moses because he is already fully integrated. He is the heavenly Moses and the earthly Moses are one, and which makes him Moses. But he doesn't go into Israel because the people were not ready to be redeemed at that point. Now, he could have been the redeemer, but that wasn't the mission. I always say that, like, it's taking, if you go abroad and you try to plug your phone into the socket, you need a transformer. So, like, God was telling Moses, like, there's no point for you going into the promised land. The promised land is full of intricacies, rules, sacrifices. That's like low resolution. You're up here. And, like, this is going to be way too frustrating for you. Like, Moses hitting the rock is like the last of like Moses' human interactions. Like, that's still his like human part still being frustrated by the Israelites because he's very far removed. I bring this in to say that when we as a people rise up to the challenge and we are closer to our heavenly self, then the Messiah will appear because we are ready to be redeemed. So I think, like, it's sort of if you build it, he will come sort of situation. There's a Talmud that says that the Messiah is sitting by the temple, by the gates of Rome, and he has like all these bandages on his body, and he's slowly taking off bandage by bandage, basically. And the attitude is like, these are us taking off our bandages, taking off these layers that we built on ourselves, so we could clearly see God, or clearly see our divine orientation and mission. So like when Nate says like we needed to be becoming, and then like sort of like we're becoming into the Messiah, I do believe that we have to be in the right place to sort of be deserving of that.
That's incredibly fascinating. Yeah, so it sounds like you're kind of talking, I mean, in similar Christian terms, I guess, would be that sounds something like theosis. And so even when you're talking about Zionism, it seems like it's at least somewhat related to that idea. And stepping into
my version of it. Jacob's going to say these are all lies.
Well, I'm glad he doesn't stroke your ego. But But yeah, I don't know. That's really interesting. I've you brought up the names. That's definitely going to be one that's going on in the back of my head now for a while. Is
What?
Elijah mentioned twice? The names twice.
Who's mentioned twice?
I know. So
Moses
Abraham,
is mentioned twice.
Moses.
Jacob is mentioned twice.
There's a
Uh,
couple in the New Testament, but we don't have to that.
Saul is mentioned twice.
Martha. I think, right? I think Martha
Martha.
was for some reason.
Um, so
Peter,
I
I
also,
think Peter was as well. Simon, um, but I don't know. Just that idea and the way that's related to, it seems related to theosis, and then Messiah will come. Um,
well,
is it?
it's more like epotheosis, which is like we like becoming into God.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, you also have to this. There's a famous verse where God lets us, and I think in chapter 2, God lets us, and by us I mean Adam, name the animals, right? And he says like, let's see what he's gonna call him, right? Like God's like with the angels, they're eating popcorn, they're like, this is the greatest hits. Let's see what this creation does right now. He's giving us the authority to do so. Which, by the way, back to the Islam comparison, in the Quran, in the Surah, God teaches Adam the names. So you see again, like that would be the difference in Judaism and Christianity. You are partaking in that, and in Islam, it's this is it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be like a difference, like how they relate. So I think also like the these kind of conversations and this little corner is in a certain I've said this a few times, that this is sort of like a modern day Talmud. This is part of the joint creation with God, what we're doing like right now, like having these conversations and understanding deeper levels of that is part of that, removing of those shells.
Yeah. Okay, so in the Muslim, I mean, I know you're not Muslim, but do they have the idea of the Imago Dei or whatever that's called, the image of God in man?
I think they do, but I'm out of my depth. Like,
yeah, okay, because that's I don't know. I mean, I could get in trouble for saying that, but that's a terrifying way to approach life for me, because there's this humility that doesn't scale in that. Like, submit where God gives you the names. It's like, I understand you submit to God, but then if you're not willing to recognize God in the other person, then you don't submit to that person as well. And then it just ends up in a weird way, you end up becoming God and just becoming judge, because it doesn't seem to scale. I don't know if I'm describing it right. Sherry says it better, where it's something like, if you love God too much, you forget to love your neighbor, and if you love your neighbor too much, you forget to love God, or something like that is the way she says it.
Again, I hopefully we're not offending anyone, but I would say that there's some truth to that. It becomes, the bigger problem is, unfortunately, it's like a numbers problem, because you have roughly 1 billion Muslims in the world, and being conservative, you have around 15%, which are extremists. Now, extremists means they'll cause trouble, not people that believe the extremist, like as in not people that have extremist beliefs, but people that are extreme enough to act. That's 150 million people. It's too many people for the world to just be like, well, just like be chill. So like, because they're less chill. So then it's a real question, because it's sort of what the world is waiting on, in a certain extent, is like sort of a reformation within Islam. It's very difficult to do that though.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot right in that approach. It's just, I shouldn't have said it the way I did. And like you said, I don't want to offend anybody, but I mean, there's a lot right to that approach. It's just like, if that's, I guess it depends on how you claim to know God. If God is still infinite, then I think it maybe it works all right, because you have to submit your knowledge in a way. And then, gosh, I'm trying to think of what my words just keep failing me today, man. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of the right way.
It's like a beautiful day though.
Yeah. It's like, it's ridiculous. It got to like 80 degrees here. I don't even know why. I kind of like the seasons, but yeah, I don't know. Just I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. My words are really leaving me. I keep trying to describe these, like while you're talking, these thoughts keep coming to me, and then but every time I open my mouth, like you said, there's that point of trying to, um, like find the words for it, and they just keep leaving me. I think Sherry asked if she could jump in.
I would say yes, but I know you wanted to also bring in Gabe. So like,
Oh
if
no,
we could,
Craig is.
Correct, sorry.
I don't think he's probably. I think he said he had to work actually, but
I'm
she's more than welcome to. If she, I mean, with me, that's fine with me. But
so Sherry, yes, you could definitely come in. I'm reposting the link.
Yeah, there's just this way, like it, because these three religions kind of keep coming up, and it's probably just in this circle too, with the Muslim faith, Judaism, and Christianity, and it's like there's this weird, seems to be this coming together of them, and or at least this interplay. I don't know that they're necessarily coming together because it seems like we're trying to find common ground, and it's extremely satisfying when we do. And there's, oh gosh, it's just, it's like right on the tip of my tongue. It's things that are hard to talk about because there's this weird way where I mentioned this to Jacob before. It's like where Israel, the nation of Israel, does this is where they I mean, Israel himself does it. That's when he gets his name, is when he wrestles with God, both God and man. And so that needs to always be happening. Like you have to be wrestling with God, where you are submitting to Him, and then, but you also have to be recognizing every other person you encounter, the stranger, like you're talking about, and then through doing that, and there seems to be this recognition of that when those two things are coming together, that they're, at least I get this sense in me that there's something going on there that's very similar to what I would think of as theosis. Is like you're talking about the divine spark within every individual and then elevating that. But you have to wrestle with that within yourself too. And removing those layers, everybody's removing these pieces of themselves to see God in man, to see, it's like, and all of that, it's not enjoyable. Like it's usually not enjoyable for either party. Because I mean, it is ultimately, I guess, but in the process, it's not always enjoyable.
Hello there. You're on mute. I'm unmuting you.
Hey, Sherry.
Hello. I don't want to interrupt. I just thought maybe.
No, you can probably help me with my words too.
You're not interrupting. Jason, based on what you were saying on Islam, I want to say, so first of all, like I said, that I think there are individuals, I think they're few and far between, that have different readings of the Quran and Hadith and could come to a, let's say, a much more pluralistic understanding, which would, that would be very beneficial, obviously, if there were if there were more prominent voices, and B, if they were joining in this circle. I'll read out to you. There's a rabbi around 1,000 years ago. His name is Rabbi Nathaniel Payumi, and he went as far as to say that he was like proving Judaism through the Quran, because he said the Quran was a divine book, so there's no reason I can't use it as the basis for my for bolstering the Judaism. And he mentions, I'll read it in English. It is obligatory for every nation to behave according to what was born of it, and to follow its prophets, priests, and leaders. And not one was left without faith, that everything is from one God, and to him they all return, and all pray if they turn towards him. And every righteous soul clings to him, as it is said, and the dust returns to the ground as it was, and the life breath returns to God who bestowed it. So that conversation obviously is that's a prominent Jewish rabbi, a contemporary of Maimonides, talking about Islam. Unfortunately, we don't hear those voices anymore, and it like I said, it is very unfortunate. But that's why, again, seeing a channel like seeing this little corner is to me a data point of sort of like the right direction.
think, and I mean, to be fair too, I don't think that's a lot, at least in my experience, that's the same thing is not spoken about a lot in Christianity as well. Like it is in this circle, like we're talking about, where it gets into things like universalism and incorporating the stranger and wrestling with man. But even in a lot of the Christian circles I've been in, it seems to be this, it's still kind of closed off in a way where it's us not them, as sad as that is, but it should be spoken about more. But that's why I think that's what I mean, where it's exciting in this corner, because you see this coming together, and I'm not sure what's necessarily causing that. There is this openness that happens here, but it's hard because it feels like we're still trying to figure out how to come together without still losing ourselves in a way or something like that. I don't know.
I think, you're saying like we're coming together. I think we are two trees that are being sustained from the same water. And I think that specifically Judaism, in a certain extent, like because we were siloed, obviously there's own rich development within Judaism, but I think this is true for Yosef as well. Being in this pool, the more I appreciate Christianity, the closer I feel to God, and the more the more comfortable I am in my Jewishness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not because I'm like, oh, like it's clearly no. It's more, I appreciate the nuance, I appreciate the difference, and I appreciate the similarities and the commonalities, which only affirm sort of my direction. So I only think that I'm going to say this. I hope this doesn't sound demeaning or dismissive, but or patronizing. But the way I envision, let's say, the world to come, so to speak, for Judaism is, and that's why I'm saying these conversations to me are data points, because the conversation would look like this. Imagine to yourself, you're going up to Jerusalem to go pray at the temple with other people there. And the idea would be to go into rooms or spaces like this, where you open up your backpack of theology, philosophy, religion, and there's a conversation there. And it could be like, okay, that whole thing about St. Maximus, that's perfect. Keep it as is. You don't have to change anything with that. This concept over here, we see it a little differently. Do these little tweaks. Those four things, they're probably not relevant anymore. Now you can be like, who are you Jews to tell us it's not relevant? So that's all fair. But that's sort of the common relationship I see. I don't see demanding of others. You can't do that. It's supposed to be a conversation where we all are. It's very, C.S. Lewis talks about this, that like when I don't know the exact quote, but like when a sculptor is making a sculpture, he's hitting it constantly. So like there's a lot of pain in those blows, but that's how you end up getting this beautiful, looking Moses or looking David that required a lot of cutting and a lot of chiseling. So, a lot of time that's sort of what we're feeling, but it's towards this beautiful masterpiece that we're building together. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. I was waiting to see if Sherry had anything. Did you have any comments?
Sherry, teach us some of your wisdom. We're waiting.
Well, what I'm thinking about when you're talking about this is, from a secular point of view, and I see the sacred and secular anyway, so it's not secular really. But you've got Jordan Peterson talking about, the mythological, psychological aspects of the scriptures. And then you've got someone like Tom Holland at the same time saying, okay, so you're literally, you come out of a Christian nation, right? And so like what I observed was that a lot of people decided to go back to their Christian roots, and some of them that meant Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Lutheranism, whatever tradition their families came from, based on the information that they had acquired through people like Tom Holland and Jordan Peterson, right? So they made this move towards acting as if, like you were talking about your Jewishness and that quote that you read about Islam from the rabbi made me think about this because it seems to be part of the movement. The movement is I don't know if I'm saying this. Tell me if you guys are getting what I'm talking about. So it's like people are moving based on their nation. You know what I'm saying? The West is Christian, and so I'm going to move towards Christianity. And we've had in the West, probably since the early 50s, this embrace of Eastern religions, right, for a long, long time. And I think that has just petered out because what ended up happening was the Christians Christianized the Eastern religions, right? They took the Eastern religion out of the Eastern religion. They did. They turned it into a workout, you know? So, and everyone seems to be at this point where they realize that they don't have that deeper meaning to their lives, and they've been looking for it hither, thither, and yon, and now they're going to go back to their roots. And those roots are national or regional or, you know, well, I think they are national, actually, in a sense, even if you're an immigrant, you know.
Well, that's part of the conversation that Paul is having, his like Winsome Wars conversation about like how is America, you know, which version of of Christianity does America sort of want to take on, and does it want to go back to a more like you know, I think back in the '60s Christianity was really fully embedded into the culture, and you know that changed over the years. And but I hear what you're saying, that there's definitely a certain return to 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 these roots. However, I think it behooves us then during this return to, you know, to really dig deep to see like, okay, if I'm going to go down this line, if I'm going to decide to reconnect to Christianity, what does that actually mean? How is that actually defined?
Well,
Is it?
yeah, I actually think that is an organic movement. Like, I think that happens organically when you are doing like what Jordan Peterson says to do, just act as if, right? So you're not buying into a proposition, you're moving towards something in the hopes that it's going to transform you. And when that happens, you are going deeper, period. Because you're looking for transformation. You're not looking for propositional truth.
So, if you don't mind, and you don't have to answer this, Jason, just following up with what Sherry beautifully articulated, do you feel, can you describe a transformation that you've gone through in the last, let's say, year and a half or so, like part of like this corner? How would you articulate transformation? Because like I've said earlier, you know, like these conversations, the more in a certain sense abstract God becomes because these conversations makes me feel closer. But the question is, how does that closeness manifest then on the day to day? Like how does that affect your relationship with friend, lover, child, parent, community?
Okay. Yeah, I definitely noticed a transformation. Gosh, I'm trying to think of. That's what I mean. I think some of the reason my words just keep leaving me is because, like I said earlier, there's a lot of questions I think I'm currently wrestling with internally that are kind of deep theological struggles for me. But as far as my day to day goes, that doesn't really affect at all because, like I said, I don't. These are the only. This is my only outlet to talk theology, usually, and philosophy, things like that. Like, I don't. I don't talk about it with family usually because actually right before Christmas I got to talk like probably close to 2 hours of theology with my parents and my grandmother, and it was very, very intense. And it made me feel. There were a few times in the conversation where I was like, "Well, I guess I'm not a Christian then," because there's a certain like Sherry mentioned, there's propositions that are kind of held, and and this transformation I've personally been going through has caused me to wrestle with those propositions, where I think there's certain aspects to the Christian story that I think are necessary in terms of story and necessary in terms of pattern, but I don't know that they're necessary in terms of the deepest thing in me that makes me who I am. And there's certain things that I just I'm just a heretic if I question them. Like, I mean, I can list them off, and one's the virgin birth, um, another one's the miracles, and then another one is the sinless nature of Christ. It's like if I question those, I'm just like a heretic. And but at that point, but there's a part of me where I'm like, well, those almost feel, I wouldn't say they're not real. Like, I would affirm all of those, and I would say they're necessary to have, but there's a way that they almost feel secondary to me. And I still haven't got the right words for it to find it yet, but it feels to me like it has something to do with theosis. Because when Jacob mentioned, what was that quote he mentioned? And I left a comment on his channel. He said, "You're a heretic," and I was like, "Don't I know it?" But he said, there's a saying in Judaism, like, if you say that David sinned, you're incorrect. And I was like, I left a comment. I said, I wonder if, like, I would be willing to apply this same thing to Christ. And it's like, the same logic. Because I think, because Jesus didn't go around flaunting how I never messed up, I never sinned. Like, it seems, I don't want to do away with that, because I think there is something to the ideal man, and I don't want to diminish the ideal. So this is me really struggling with this right now live. So, like, I'm really, really hesitant to even bring these things up, because I haven't wrestled with them enough internally. But at the same time, it almost feels a little bit secondary because of the power that's in repentance and forgiveness. And that power that is in repentance and forgiveness is necessary for theosis. And so it's like, it feels, the sinless nature, the virgin birth, all these things seem very important. And I don't ever want to, like, throw them out or anything like that. Like, they seem very, very important, especially in terms of, like, story and narrative and to where humanity is heading. But at the same time, they feel a little bit like secondary. Like, the most core thing is something like repentance and forgiveness. And I think it's maybe more properly defined as, like, unconditional love or something like that. And so that's all that to say, I guess that's kind of, especially the past year, that's kind of been, I guess, a transformation. The past, like, 5 years. So basically, I grew up in Christian circles, and I kind of went away to college. In the past 5 years, I guess I've been coming back to it and just kind of trying to read the scriptures and figure out just what the Bible actually says. So the past 5 years have been very transformative, but the past year in particular has been a lot of wrestling with that, and wrestling with the there's a weird mystical way to say it, like this endless thing of mirrors, where, like, I can't actually see God's face unless I see everybody's face. Like, there's a way in which I would look at you, Chezi, and say, "My Lord and my God," and I'd look at Sherry and say the same thing. And it's like, there's like, I would say that in most Christian circles, and I'd probably even be considered a heretic or something. But then I mean, it's a struggle for me too, because I run into this weird thing, and sometimes in Christianity, and it's not intentional, and Christians don't mean it that way, but it's this weird word, quote, like, we, in Christian circles, they'd call it Pharisaical, although I think Jacob would probably say the Pharisees weren't really like that. But according to, like, the Gospels, there's this part in there where it's Jesus is healing the paralytic, and he says, which is easier to say, "Son, your sins are forgiven you," or "Rise up and walk." And then he says, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." And then the Pharisees ask this question, who on earth can forgive sins but God alone? And it's like, this whole thing is a demonstration that we're the ones that have to forgive. Like, forgiveness is given to man. It's in the power of man. And then, like, I'll even talk to Christians, and they'll be like, "Well, only God can forgive you." And I'm like, no. I have to have your forgiveness. Otherwise, like, gosh, I don't want to put anybody on blast, but, like, because that's what I mean. They don't, it's not, it's just, it's there. I know the forgiveness and the love is there in almost every Christian I come across. It's just like not here or something. Because I was sitting at the table with my mom, and she made that statement. Like, I said something about how, well, you have my forgiveness, Mom. And she was like, no, I don't. God does. And I was like, no, you do have my forgiveness. Otherwise, I would not be sitting at the table with you. I was like, I would not be here. Like, you have to have my forgiveness. Otherwise, I'm cast out, and there's nothing here, because I've messed up. Like, I'm not a good kid. I've like broken every rule they probably made for me. So I'm like, yeah, you have my forgiveness as much as God does, because it has to be the reconciliation of all things. Otherwise, and I may be saying things that are maybe heretical to Christianity, maybe Judaism as well. But I'm like, I don't know. These are things that I've just been personally struggling with, and I haven't even found the right way to talk about them yet, I guess. So
I just want to, before Chezi says what he's thinking about, because I know he's thinking about something, but I just wanted to say this quickly. Jason, this is the goo stage.
yeah, I know. It's caterpillar.
The caterpillar turning into the butterfly turns to goo, and out of the goo come the wings, like butterfly wings form out of this goo, right? And it reminds me of the beginning of Genesis, when everything was chaos, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a goo, and you're talking about metanoia, right? I don't know what the Hebrew word is for that, but it's a similar idea with repentance, where you make a turning. Like, in Job, he says that the awe of God is the beginning of wisdom, right? And understanding is departing from evil, or departing from evil is understanding, one or the other. Either way, what happens, and this is this organic movement, and this is why I can talk about goo, because that's also organic. But when you make that turn, right? When you make that turn, you immediately depart from evil. And that's why you can forgive. Okay? You can, because why not? That's what the question becomes. The question becomes, why not? Like, you don't have the bitterness and the anger and the selfishness, and that, because of the metanoia, right? The turning. And to me, that turning is a facing God, right? As soon as you face God, then you have turned your face to God, and everything else falls. It doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't make sense to harbor bitterness. It doesn't make sense to be angry, right? And so you organically move away from evil. You organically move away from it. But and that's what you're feeling. You're feeling all that movement in your life and all that chaos, right? And so everything is this ambiguous goo. But believe me, Jason, your wings, they're going to come out of that goo. And they're going to just astound people. Seriously. As they do, as they emerge. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for sharing that, Sherry. And thank you so much for sharing that, Jason, because I'm sure that was very difficult, and that was very candid of you. So obviously, we appreciate that. I did send this video to all your employers, though, so please.
It's just my dad. Only my dad employs me. So
I see. So a few thoughts that could be out of place and out of context. Not out of context, but out of place. So first of all, with regards to David not sinning. So ironically, the reason we could say David didn't sin, even though he clearly sinned, is because he repented. And hence the magical power of repentance, which is very, tied to free will, because like we have to be able to, mess up and ask for forgiveness. In the Day of Atonement, you are required to ask if there's someone that you've harmed or hurt. You need to ask forgiveness at least 3 times before you could then sort of chuck it up to God, being like, okay, I did my part, and like now it's up to you. But the attitude is like you got to keep on trying to get forgiveness from the person, which is like very, again, like you and your mother were having a different conversation, because in Judaism, teshuva, metanoia is very much interpersonal. Now, yes, there's a whole level between you and God, but that first sort of has to happen between you and the other if you want to then have that conversation sort of with God, and they could also happen at the same time. But so for to saying that if as far as Jesus not sinning, it could be like Jesus sinning and Jesus repenting, and hence he could still be in that status of the perfect man, because the perfect man doesn't mean there wasn't any mistakes. The perfect man knows how to get back up.
This is also why Mary is the virgin, right? Like the same principle. It's because she says, "Let it be unto me," right? Because of her integrity towards God, that she is ever virgin. And well, I mean, that's my heretical opinion. But
no, I would agree with that. But
in the spirit of heresy, Maimonides talks about a term called necessary truths. So if you were looking for the right term, Jason, so these could be necessary truths, okay? Mm-hmm. And Jordan Peterson talks about like a hyper truth, but I'll give an example, and unfortunately, I'm getting tagged by my wife. But the example I would give of a truth like this is there is a sage named, Jacob's going to hate this. There's a sage named Rabbi Akiva, famous sage. And we learn that in his story, he was a man, he didn't know much, he wasn't very smart. He marries this very wealthy man. He marries his daughter, and his daughter says, if you want to marry me, she tells him go study, and he goes study the Torah, and he studies for a certain amount of time, and then he comes back and he overhears her in the window. She didn't see him for years. He overhears her saying that she wouldn't mind if he would learn like double the amount of time. She loves him so much and she appreciates what he's doing. He doesn't even go into the house. He leaves. He learns double the amount of time. He comes back, and they have this beautiful celebration, and he comes back with his 24,000 students, which are 12 pairs of 1,200 pairs. And ultimately, all what we're learned is the 24,000 students perish. They die because of infighting. Now, there is a man, and Rabbi Akiva is named in the Talmud sometimes Ukba. There's another person, and Rabbi Akiva marries a woman named Rachel. There's another person you might know named Jacob, who's also called Ukba, and he marries a woman named Rachel, and he has 12 sons, and he works for double the amount of time for Laban, and Laban's very rich. Now, what does this mean that we see this pattern repeating itself? Does that mean that Jacob wasn't real? Does that mean that Rabbi Akiva is a fake? These are necessary truths to embed and move information through. So does Rabbi Akiva exist? Yes. Was his name Rachel? Was it Jessica? I don't know. The idea is Rachel is the pattern that we're putting on top over here. Did he have 12,000 students? Was it 12,000 pairs? Maybe it was 20,000 students. Maybe it was 11,000 pairs. The point is there's a certain copy paste over here, which is very important for these patterns to be recognized. Now, I'm with you that once you sort of unveil this, you're like, okay, so what does this mean? What does this mean that Solomon's temple is very much like the architecture that he's around? What does this mean that the tabernacle has these colors? So I don't see these things as necessarily reasons to step back and hide. I look at this as like a chance again to embrace and realize how, like we were saying, that God, there's no space that's void of God. These things repeat themselves. But on that note, unfortunately, you guys should definitely continue. You should clock in Craig. And I leave you guys with a blessing of a good day, rest of your day, and health and tranquility.
You too.
Schmooze, guys.
Yeah.
Bye, Chezi.
Oh, Christian Golden's in here. Hop in here, Christian, if you want. Yeah, so I don't know. Don't know where to go from here. That's kind of, I feel like I'm in the goo phase.
Totally. I was watching you and he's goo. He's all goo.
Yeah, it's really hard for me because like the and Hezi said that right at the end. He said the perfect man, the complete man, is the one of repentance and forgiveness.
Mhm.
And I agree with that. But then I'm like, well, does that like David, he sinned with Bathsheba, but then he repented and was forgiving. And it's like if I apply that to Jesus, what do I do to Christianity at that point? Does it open it up? Does it broaden it? Does it say this is this? Because I do think that's what I'm really struggling with. I do think that is the ideal.
Well, I'm going to say something a little bit maybe provocative here, but that's the only way I know how to express it, because we've been talking about this in the Boxer recently, and it dawned on me, because there is such a thing as veiling, right? The truth is veiled and multivalent, and so the veils have to be lifted, right, little by little.
Mhm.
And if you tear the veil off, okay, so what is veiled? The feminine is veiled, okay? The bride is veiled,
Mhm.
right? And if you tear the veil off in one big, violent move, you basically are having sex before marriage, right? So this, and it dawned on me the other day. I'm like, well, this is why you don't have sex before marriage, right? This is
Mhm.
why you don't take the veil off
Yeah.
until you are committed, right? Until you have made that movement towards that kind of a union, which is what theosis is. Okay,
Yeah.
you can call it whatever in any other faith, but it's always there, in my opinion. This union between the divine and the human, right? And so, you know, you're saying you're worrying about um, saying something that will make a person feel violated. And so the way that I think, Jason, is that if the person feels violated,
Mhm.
they have been violated, right?
Mhm.
And I mean,
Yeah.
Solomon says there is a time for everything, right? There's a
Yeah.
season for everything. And so this is why I think discernment is so important, because you need to be able to discern, you know, when it's time to lift the veil, right?
Yeah.
And you better
Yeah.
be sure that you're married to that before
Which
before,
means which means the death to self for sure.
right?
When you're gonna enter into
Like,
that.
I honestly never thought about it before, but that is the symbolism of the veil.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really good. And I like
Yeah.
how you mentioned sex before marriage too and all that. Yeah, that's really good. And I think that those things actually really, really hit home. Because um that's why I think I'm scared to even talk about it. That's why I'm having trouble finding the words. Because I don't think they're there yet for a reason. Because I just think it's I haven't quite taken the time to, I guess, properly lift that veil
There's
internally or whatever before I should be saying these things publicly. Maybe.
you know what, it kind of feels like I was prepared to have this conversation with you, because I was just talking to Nate yesterday about a conversation I had with my sister. And in First Nations culture, if you have a dream, a spiritual dream, and you learn something, if you tell it, if you go blab it around, like in that
Hmm.
fashion, those are the words she used, then you give away the power of the dream,
Hmm.
right? So there is something very sacred about keeping something secret. And we tend to think, I know I do anyways. I'm the kind of person who feels uncomfortable keeping maybe a belief system or a way of thinking about the world secret from someone else who I know would be offended by it, right? So I feel like I'm lying in a sense. But maybe I'm loving, actually, because I'm not tearing the veil off and violating them, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are just some things to think about. It doesn't mean it
So
applies to you or your situation, but
No, I think it does. I mean, I think that's why, like I said, I don't blab these things in church. The church I'm in too. It's just like they're. I mean, if someone asked me, like you're saying, I don't think I would lie about what I
No,
believe,
no,
but
no.
they remain hidden because I just, yeah, because like you said, it is just a weird way of violating people,
Mhm.
and I don't want to do that. And that's what's a weird thing about doing it here or talking about these things here online is because like it's a weird, it's like an insular space that's out in the universe or something. Like Grail Country is a certain space and it's got this certain it's got a spirit to it now. It's got a certain like but at the same time it's broadcast to everybody. So it's got a safe space and you can talk about these different ideas, but at the same time it's like anybody can hear it in a way. But then you're in a way you're not necessarily you're not violating anybody that doesn't want to actually engage in that. Like you're not like going in. It's not like walking up to somebody and just ripping the veil off, like you said. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing that's happening. So I think me even saying it on here isn't quite the same
No,
because
it's
people
not.
can just
There,
shut me off. You know.
there is such a thing as the parable of the sower, right? Where he casts
Oh,
seed everywhere, right? He casts it everywhere. And like I can remember early in my Christian life, I was never comfortable with the idea of evangelism. I felt like it was like ripping the veil off, violating somebody, force feeding somebody.
hmm.
Um,
How do I? Sorry, it looked like Chad just dumped. Do I have to add him? Do I? Is that? I haven't really used StreamYard before. Do you know how to do it? Or it
oh,
looked Chad jumped in. I wasn't sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
I
you.
think you just click on his image and it'll say add.
Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Hey
Okay,
there.
cool. Hey.
Hi, add.
I have to keep my camera off because I don't have a mask or anything.
Okay.
Oh, I love you guys. I love this whole conversation. It was very enlightening.
Thanks, Chad. It's good to talk to you again. I think I've only ever spoken to you once before, but
Yeah, I really love the commonalities. There's like a spirit of understanding and rumination,
Yeah.
kind of dancing there in the whole conversation. It's
Yeah.
very, very relatable and enjoyable.
And probably
thank-
practical because that's all I ever do. I'm boring. I'm boring to talk to.
Oh,
especially
I
when
love it.
I don't think you're boring at all. I love
Well, it's a
listening to
spirit
everything.
that I recognize. You know, like when I hear you talk, we're talking on this, like the keeping the veil and things like this. There's something that, like, what comes to my mind is a phrase called spiritual anonymity, which just
Mhm.
means, who am I to tell you what you should, uh, how you
Well,
need to move?
this is why when Jordan Peterson said be careful about alleviating someone's suffering. That's exactly what I thought of at the time, right? So,
Right? Let's do that.
like an actual experience once where a girl said to me, "I want to ask Jesus into my heart. Will you pray with me?" And I said no. Because I knew intuitively, and I wasn't making a judgment on her soul, but I just thought, no, she's joining a club. She is not. She has no concept of what is actually happening. She needs to continue her journey, and if she continues the journey in the with the false information that she's saved, it's gonna make her life even more difficult. That's how I felt. So I said no.
Sure.
I said no, and she ended up finding some people, right, who would say the magic words with her, and and yeah, the story wasn't very pretty after that, to be honest with you. But I'm trying to remember why I said that now. Oh, I was talking to Jason before about the parable of the sower, and to
Yeah.
me, that's what I think that's what we are tasked with, right? Like we have these seeds, whatever the seeds are, and I'm not saying that they're the truth. Like they could be seeds of all kinds of different things, and you throw them out there, and they land, and either they grow or they don't grow. But if we're all sowing, at some point, there will be a harvest, right? Like there will be enough of those seeds that do grow. And the seeds are not people. The seeds are for the people, right? That is why you sow seed. You sow seed to nourish the people. That's what you do. They are not the
Yes.
people. And that some people don't sprout, and some people dry up, and some people burn in a fire, and some people no. I'll just say it flat out.
I was just wondering, like, so, like, I get the sense that most of us who are moving in this kind of more productive slash wrestling direction get the sense that we're kind of in good company for the most part, and so and that we could share meals together, basically. So then I wonder, like, because we wrestle so much with what's uh, the right thing or whatever, what then is the purpose of tradition? Because
Yeah,
like
I heard that question yesterday, Chad. That was a good question.
because it's like it's interesting to me because I wouldn't consider myself coming from a so-called Christian tradition, though I would consider myself to be captured by Christ and hopefully working better towards that. Um, but I come from a tradition that is uh, what we would call a spiritual kindergarten, and um, in all sorts of different people, just like in this space where you have all sorts of people of different beliefs work together in a practical manner towards a solution, which is seeking God. And then we kind of leave it there and say, whatever you decide, fine. And then, so I think it's interesting. But then I hear that there's, troubles with pluralism, which I guess I could see that. But I don't know. It's interesting to me. So what then is the purpose of tradition? Excuse
I actually think
me.
that it has to do with accumulated wisdom. It's like if you boiled it down to First Nations culture, for example, tradition would be what the elders teach. And what the elders teach is accumulated wisdom, right? And to think that you can go through life without the benefit of accumulated wisdom is to actually be a fool, because you need that wisdom in order to keep you from falling down and bruising and breaking things even more severely than you will, right? Because you will. So, um, and I actually think that this doesn't just apply to Christianity or any other faith, but it applies to the culture itself. Like especially in North America, we've lost our elder tradition. We we have regulated old people to homes where they just stare at each other in the face till they're gone, you know,
Oh,
and
God.
and there's no one to benefit from them, right? From their and you get this as an elder, you're okay, I don't know how to explain it any other way, but when I go to any kind of First Nations gatherings, if an elder walks in, everybody stands up and offers them their chair. Okay, number one. So there's this high respect for the fact that that person has gotten that old and are, they're still here with us, right? And it's understood that they know things that I don't know yet. And when they die, those things are gone forever. And so when they die, when elders die in the First Nations tradition, they mourn the loss of all the knowledge that died with them. We don't. We don't have that anymore. And we don't respect the knowledge that they carry either, our elders. We've really lost. And so to me, that's what tradition represents, Chad. That's what I would say about Lutheranism or Orthodoxy or Catholicism or any other forms of Protestantism or Islam or whatever, right? This
Right.
is
Yeah.
accumulated wisdom. And I
Well,
think that's important.
that's one thing I kind of wrestle with too, though, because when I'm wrestling with these other questions that aren't necessarily traditional, I feel like I'm almost there's a way in where I feel like I'm being disrespectful to the forefathers, you know, to even question these sort of things, or you know,
Well,
where
to
I'm not.
impose them would, I think, be more. That's my sense. Sorry, I didn't cut you off, but that's why I feel like it would be more disrespectful to impose your or off, kind of off kilter beliefs over the other. You know what I'm saying? Like that's where I think it
That's a good
becomes
point.
disrespectful. The other part is to wrestle with it in private is, I think, inevitable.
Well,
No, you didn't cut. That was good.
for me, Jason, what ends up happening in my thought process, if I think, okay, do I tell this person that they're wrong? Then I have to ask myself, what's wrong? What does that mean? If I believe that everyone is on a journey and that they need to benefit from every aspect of their journey, then how this gets back to my first statement when I said this, that when Jordan Peterson said, be careful about alleviating someone's suffering, right? And telling someone that they're wrong can be a form of alleviating suffering for them. And is that your place to alleviate their suffering? Or is it important for them to have that experience, right? And of course, then, you have to discern. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
what I always think when I think about that is I was there once and look where I am now. I thought those things, but I don't think them anymore. But you can't, and this gets to the parable of the rich young ruler, right? So it's like he says to Jesus, what can I do to be a better person? And Jesus says, you're fine just as you are. He says, no, 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 no. He argues, no, I want to do more. So then Jesus tells him the end of his life, because as it turns out, he's Barnabas. And at the end of his life, he gives away all his riches to the poor, right? So Jesus projects him into his future and he shows it to him. And what happens to him? He goes away sad because he can't reconcile. And it's so interesting to me that he's called the rich young ruler. Okay, young. He's at the beginning of his life, and he can't reconcile that with the end of his life, with all the changes, all the transformation. He missed the goof it, right?
Yeah.
He needs
Yeah,
the
yeah.
he totally needs a goof phase.
Yeah,
You never want to stand in the way of somebody's powerlessness and unmanageability, unless, of course, they ask.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Jason, I wanted to jump in because I actually shared this a few times here recently on our Voxer group that I feel like I don't know how to articulate like what I'm saying because I too. So I'm 53. I grew up in Midwestern evangelical waters, right? Was a seminarian and was a house church planter and teacher. So I was preparing a sermon every Sunday. I had, by the way, Jason, I had answers, right? And now I've been opened up to all this new thinking, right? And I've been on this journey of seeking. I've gone from Methodism to megachurch to house church to now I'm here, right? And why I think it's important that you keep talking about these things as you can or whatever. I think in safe spaces, like you mentioned, Grow Country or in like a chatting like this, as other people are going through that too. So it's okay to show your math, so to speak, right? Like let people see the process because that's encouraging. And I also, Sherry talks about the goo. What I've realized is like there are things I still have. My very, very best friends, these are men that I've lived life with, and we've gone through the death of my wife, like all this amazing stuff, and they're going to be my friends till the day I die. And I still go to a house church with them. But I find that there are certain things they're saying and doing that I no longer, I want to jump into like say, and it's, I would say, and by the way, this is no knock on Protestantism at all. There are deep and wonderful, but there's some surface level kind of those confessional things we've all kind of agreed to, you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
that that also can be pretty harsh about who God is in my new kind of understanding. And so I have found that I just don't say anything because I don't know what to say. And I think my response is to not say anything right now because this stuff is forming. And I think everything in its time and in its place, because here's what, for example, in that group of men, here's what I don't want to do. You know what those men are doing? They're getting up at 4:30 and 5 o'clock every morning to pray, to read the word. They are wonderful husbands and dads. They all have some sort of amazing service in the community where they're sacrificing themselves for others. They're mentoring young men. Like how they live it is magnificent.
Yeah.
So how we talk about it and how I want to challenge, but the things I would want to talk about are so foreign because they were so foreign to me. Like to even start contemplating things like apokatastasis, for example. It like that's just something that's not even on the table is something they can talk about. And so I think as you go through this, and I haven't been able to talk about this with my parents either. Now they're getting up a little bit, and be honest, they're not as fast as they once were. They would have no place to even comprehend the things I would want to talk about right now. So I haven't even like put it out there for them. So, you know, I would just say that when I see you, I relate. I'm there too. But one of the lucky things that I've been able to fall back on, and that's why I'm glad Chad came here. And this is why I would always tell to Chad, because I've spent a lot of time marrying 12-step recovery with biblical studies and Christian ideas and everything else, is I've lived in an environment where a God of your own understanding works.
Yeah.
You don't have to say the name Jesus. You don't. And that person can follow God and is in communing with God and is meditating with God and is living it out. And I would never once have to go to a person in AA who's 30 years sober, who is living a Christ-like life, but does not use the name Jesus. I've never felt the need to have to tell that person that they have to confess this stuff or say this thing. Like I've lived it. And so I have this capability where I can have this high degree of openness towards God and broad roominess. And so that has given me the framework as I'm stepping into this new, much more broader and open thinking, which just marries right into to a 12-step environment. And so I've seen it work. And so that's part of the thing. I'm like, hey, I can approach my Christianity the same way I approach my 12-step life, right? And take that out into the world. But what this openness has done for me is like Chezi and Joseph and others is I see so many more similarities with my brothers and sisters. And part of it has been, and I talked to Sherry, and I'll quit rambling, but you had me excited about where you were at, was pressing in and immersing myself in Orthodox practices, which are very married into my 12-step life, but the services and the liturgies and the rituals and the bells and the smells, I can't articulate. It's not something you can read in a book, but I am being transformed by that in ways that unless you put yourself in it, you can't understand it.
Mhm.
So
makes sense.
I just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, Jason. Like you are on the path, and don't worry about what anybody else thinks. Like, don't worry about it.
Well, I'm not. Yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, I'm not. There's a degree to where I'm not worried about it, but then there's a small degree where I am because I mean, it is about relationship ultimately. So it's like
Yeah.
I don't want to. Like it's the degree I'm worried about. It was kind of the degree that I think Sherry mentioned earlier. Is like you don't want to rip the veil off too soon or violate someone else or something like that because I don't want to. Yeah, I don't know, sever any relationships through some sort of half-baked opinion of mine or something, you know, where I'm still wrestling with,
Well,
because I feel like all my opinions are half-baked anyway, but
well, it's not so much a half-baked proposition as it is a pursuit of God, and you don't want your pursuit of God to
Mhm.
divide you from another person.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
That is not what you want to happen.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
this is the question I always pose: how do you love properly? That is the hardest thing to do. Okay, because we want to, there was a verse at the end of Job, I think it was chapter 38, where God says, will you condemn me just so that you can be right? You know, and this is what we want to do in our relationships with other people. We want to condemn them, right? Tell them they're wrong,
Yeah.
just so that we can be right. And then what? And then where are you? Right? Well, what happens to God if Job condemns him so that he can be right? God is no longer there in the whirlwind. He's not talking to Job. He's what? He's gone. He's silent. Because the relationship has been ended by Job, because he
Mhm.
condemned God so that he can be right. Right? So, there is a process. Jesus did this to Pilate when Pilate said to him, are you guilty of these crimes that they're charging you with? Knowing that he wasn't, okay? But he had to ask the question. So are you guilty? And what did Jesus do? Nothing. He said nothing. He basically mirrored back, right? The injustice that was about to go down. That's what he did. He mirrored it back to Pilate. And
Yeah.
that's why Pilate had to, there's where did I read that? I read a story once. Oh, I think it's in Scotland. Scotland. Apparently, one of Pilate's sons went to Scotland. A lot of the British Isles likes to attach himself to the Holy Land somehow, right? The Celtic Christianity in medieval times. But anyway, there was this myth that Pilate never stopped washing his hands after that, right? Because of the silence of Christ. It mirrored back exactly what was about to happen. And this is something that your silence does. If somebody rails against you and you remain silent and love them anyway, you mirror back to them their own anger, their own bitterness, their own fear of losing something that they think they have, which they don't really, but they think they do, right? And they don't want to lose it, because if they lose it, then what? And all you're doing is bringing that, you're a threat to all of that, right? And this is where they feel violated. So, I can't talk about my faith with my family, but I don't need to. I love them anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things, Sherry, is important is I think and this goes against gospel proclaiming, but I think in many more times it's our job to be silent. I think
Yeah.
we feel the need
I think so
to
too.
tell people something, to communicate something.
Fill in the
Even
gap.
if you think it's valuable to them, or you have an opinion, or you see a problem, I think in most of our relationships we need to be much more reticent to share. But there are moments where you should speak into something, and that's a flow kind of thing. Right time, right place. And sometimes how that will look is, if you don't speak immediately, like Sherry can tell you, she had this moment where we were in a voice chat where I was speaking and she wanted to say something to me, and she was biting her tongue, but there was something in her spirit after her where she finally said, I'm just going to say this. And I was being evangelically and stuff like this, kind of stating, pontificating. And she said something, not rude, but pointed and clear. And I took that as a moment. And I felt like that was God talking to me, to kind of, as I took back of it. So you don't, sometimes you are supposed to speak and not be afraid about offending someone,
Yeah.
because you're supposed to speak that word in that moment to that person. But that's all right time, right place. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And sometimes you'll be the teacher, that you'll be the vessel that God has in front of that person in that moment, that's going to
Mhm.
share this thing, right? And so kind of judging that. And I would say probably we would all be better off if we refrained if we frame more, if we were quiet a little more often than speak, like if I had to go one way or the other, I'd probably err towards now later in life not saying something versus saying something, because I'm someone who wants to tell you something. And that hasn't worked out well. You talk about relationships. That's generally not well in relationships. And that's different in a mentee-mentor relationship where you've given someone the permission. Okay, you be brutally honest with me. Okay, hold nothing back. Well, that's a whole different thing. But most of our relationships are not that.
I have a whole lot to learn from you, Lance. Good jolly.
What was that?
Am I roboting?
I didn't understand what you said.
You mumbled,
Oh,
I
I
think.
said,
Oops.
He's
Now you're
roboting
we're
now.
losing you.
It's really nice to meet you, Lance, by the way. I don't think I've seen you on a video before, but I don't think I've ever
Oh, I
spoken.
feel like I know you because I've watched so many of your videos.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Well, you run in the grow country circles. Those are my people.
Sort of. I feel like I'm kind of in and out a little bit. I don't know. I try to pop in there. I definitely watch all their videos for sure, but a lot of times those guys over there, Sherry, Nate, they always feel like they're on another level. I don't know. I try to keep up as best I can.
Poor Jacob that this conversation is happening on his channel. Sorry,
I know,
Jacob.
right? I feel. Let's not talk about Jesus anymore.
Well, it's also
as long as we don't talk about Paul, I think we're okay.
It's also happening on Jason's channel. So just so everyone knows, I was over there all by myself in the chat.
I think it's on Hezy's too. So that's another. Yeah, that was another thing I kind of wanted to ask. Or maybe we should bring that up, because with the live stream, I noticed that last time when Hezy was streaming on his and Jacob's channel, I was all alone over on Hezy's channel, and then the chat. I think eventually Nate hopped over on Hezy's channel, but it seems like in at least for the chat, the live stream, the chat that's happening, like we should probably, I don't know, maybe say something at the start to tell everybody which channel to meet on or something, because because I think when you're in the video, you can see all of the comments, but when you're on a certain channel, you can't, or something like that.
From both channels, you can see all the comments?
I think so. Yeah, because when Hezy was doing it before, he was reading Nate's comments, which were from his channel, and I was over in Jacob's channel. So I think he was getting all the comments in the live stream, but the person who's commenting doesn't get to see all of it or something like that. But,
right.
If you can click on some comments, Jacob he did come in with say, "I will never forgive any of you."
Oh, there we go.
Oh, no.
And Phoebe has said different people have different jobs. Not all should be silent as a default. Exactly. That's right. Again, there are different relationships in different times in different places and spaces. For example, as a dad to a child, I still should be discerning, but that's a very different thing in terms of trying to raise a child and speak to them, speak into it to correct or do some of those things. That's a whole different thing than most of the people I'm in relationship with in the world. But I totally agree with that, Phoebius.
Yeah, and this is why I prefaced everything with Solomon's "there is a time for everything," right? So, you really need to be in I mean, what I have done in the past, literally, was say, I don't know how I'm supposed to what am I supposed to say right now? Do I say this, or do you want me to say anything, or say nothing? And it's not, God has never failed me. I was, either it was just shut up, or no, how about this, say, and then I do, and crazy things happen. Crazy things.
Well, and that's why I think and then certain people are raised up, like Jordan Peterson has spent 40 years in deep thought and contemplation and clinical practice. He's been given this global voice. And I know a lot of people are, I wish he wouldn't say this or that. I think Jordan Peterson's supposed to be Jordan Peterson and say what he wants to say. He knows exactly why he's doing it. And whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, maybe. But I think, in that instance, I think there are different roles in people, and you've got to figure out where you're at.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to give you
one of the things that terrified me about Sorry.
Go ahead, Chad. Go ahead, Chad.
I wasn't sure if I was. One of the things that terrified me about becoming a religious person was becoming like some of the religious people that I had seen. You know, like there's a family member who had recently passed away, but back when he was alive, he was like this supposedly very devout Catholic, and to the point where a girlfriend of his daughter passed away, and he ends up telling his girlfriend that, well, she doesn't have a biblical name, so she's going to hell. And like things like that would terrify me about becoming a religious person, because like I don't know, it's like it's such weirdness. So I have a lot to learn from you guys. And I'm grateful that I ran into really great examples of so-called religious people of all sorts.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
I was going to give you my version of the story of when I said the pointed thing to Lance.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So I jump on the Discord chat, and there's this evangelical guy just preaching up a storm, and I'm like, roll my eyes. I'm like, oh, okay. Stop judging. Just listen. Maybe he has some good things to say. Maybe there's something you don't know that he knows. And I'm listening and listening, and I can feel the love from him. I know why he's doing it, but he's doing it all wrong. I was thinking, and then I was getting mad. I don't know why, but I was getting mad, and I thought, no, you can't. You better not say anything, because it's not going to come out right. It's gonna come out really, really terrible. And so I listened and listened and listened for the longest time. I don't remember what it was that I said, but I just remember I couldn't not say it. Like, I just could not say it. And I kept it short because I didn't want anyone to know how I really felt.
Did you end up having to pay something like a price for that after the fact? Like, did you feel...
Okay, so this is what I want to get to, because this is the thing that floored me the most was... I felt immediately guilty because I felt like I came out of a bad place, right? And then Lance launched like a freaking rocket right out into outer space, and he was just like, woo, And I was like, I was so humbled by that when that happened. I was like, oh my God, even God could use someone who has a bad attitude.
And the specific point was, I'll say it, and I wasn't trying to. People were talking about penal substitutionary atonement, and I was giving the textbook answer.
Yes.
I came from that world, but here I was pontificating the actual right answer for penal substitutionary atonement. And Sherry jumped in and very pointedly said, do you know that? Do you know that for certain? And she just said that. Have you ever opened and she just said, have you ever opened up the idea that you could be wrong about that? And that's all. It was just, and then she just...
Ooh, she gave you a spanking, man.
and then she just was quiet, and that was it. So it was very short. It was very short, but what she did is she asked me a question. She didn't accuse me. Do you think you could be wrong about that?
Mm-hmm.
This is the most wise question any of us could ask ourselves at a given moment of the day.
Yeah,
it's such a good question, because it's like it really is like a humbling position if you're really willing to ask yourself that question.
Yeah.
It's a terrifying question too.
That is the question I've been asking. I ask myself that all the time, actually. When I dig into something, I'm like, oh, that's it's got to be like blah blah blah. And I go, well, could you be wrong about that? And then I get to the more interesting stuff. Right.
Yeah. And then so as it went on, she pointed me to the justice sermon, and Luke was on that call. And so then I read the justice sermon. I was blown away by George MacDonald, blown away because it made perfect sense to me. Mm-hmm. And I'd spent years in that Bible and all that stuff. I mean, that stuff made sense to me. And then I jump in, start reading patristics and Christian mystics. And I was very charismatic anyway and stuff. And I just, for 3 weeks, immersed myself in it. And less than a month later, I said, well, I got to go down to this Orthodox. I got to see if this stuff works, because I got to make sure I got to put stuff into practice. Like, that's just who I am. I got to see if it works. So I went to one Orthros and Divine Liturgy, and I was overwhelmed with the sense that I was home.
I remember, Lance,
So-
you said, after you read the Justice sermon, I think you DM'd me and you said something like, I've always thought this. I've always known this was how it is. But I'd never heard it. I apparently never heard it from anyone, right? But it resonated with you completely. Like, it was just something that, and that's, like, you were so right for the picking.
Well, one of the things I am is I'm very passionate, but I'm very coachable. My coaches used to tell me that.
When I say right for the picking, I mean you have made the journey, right? You were already there, and nobody had opened that door and said, have you seen this room? This is a beautiful room, you know?
Yeah, I've spent 20 plus years in leaving my career behind in pursuit of the person of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it had been 20 years of a pursuit.
Yeah.
I really think this spiritual principle, I bet you it'd work if you were really like on anything, right? Like if I was really willing to humble myself to this, seeing where I might be wrong or about something, it'd be transformational every time.
Yes,
And
it is.
even if it would be like, about sardines, you know what I'm saying? Like it's such a, because it's like, that's, I don't know, I know it seems weird, but every transformation I've ever had has been a result of really submitting to the discipline of that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna order some Culvers and listen.
It's not so bad when you ask yourself that question. It's worse when someone else asks you, though. My husband said to me, do you think you could be wrong? I'm like, no.
Yeah. Of course not. That's funny. Yeah, there's a weird thing too, where like, when you're talking about times to speak and not to speak, I feel like sometimes even when you do speak, the best thing is just to ask a question. Or maybe, I mean, I don't know if that's always the case, but sometimes that's the case. Because I'm still absolutely floored, like blown away from the conversation that I mentioned that I had with my parents before Christmas with my grandmother. And my grandmother has this thing where, like, I don't know why, she has this way. I think because she'll ask those questions, she has this way of kind of maybe opening that space. But somehow, like I said, I never talk about those things. And there was this weird space that was open, and it was like, now we were talking about it, but the only thing I could do was kind of ask questions. Usually around all of that. And then I remember getting looks. Like, I'd get looks like almost like, I don't know if it was concern or fear of like, why are you even asking these questions, Jason, or something like that. Like when I, like the virgin birth or something, I think I said like, not that it's not, I mean, I do think it's extremely important in terms of story, but I'm trying to think of a specific one that I asked. Oh, one that I asked was, like, what is salvation? Like, I just asked that question. And if you ask that to a Christian, it's like, I don't know that a lot of them normally know necessarily how to answer it. But then the answer I got back, I think, was spot on in that my dad said it's a relationship with God. And I think I don't think that's wrong at all. But I think it's like, I think that's, there's more I could add to that where like, it's kind of getting into everything I'm talking about. Like, the relationship with God is ultimately the relationship with every single part of his creation as well, because that all comes from God, which I don't think is in a lot of Christians' minds when they think of that, but it's better than living forever or something like that, because if you set the answer, if you ask someone what salvation is, and they say Okay, go ahead.
Here's a question for you, Jason, regarding the what is salvation. What was salvation for the prodigal son?
The coming back to his family, right? Coming back to the father.
Well,
Is that right or no?
Well, I don't know if it's wrong, but not the one.
It's okay. You can spank me.
No, I'm not.
Are you sure you could be right about that? Sorry, I would just use that term because it was funny because I hooked Mitch and Luke Thompson together, and then it resulted in a bunch of spankings from Mitch for Luke. It became a joke in our little. We had a little.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So
Well,
He remembered who he was.
yeah.
Right. Thank you.
He remembered who he was. That's good.
He remembered who he was. This is what we don't. This is our salvation. That's what it is. That's exactly right.
And to be very ecumenical, like when you were talking to Chezi earlier, and this whole idea of repentance, like he's just mapping that onto in Judaism, which is just repentance and forgiveness. We're kind of at the heart for you and for me. In my daily Orthodox way of life, there's this focus on mercy. Gosh, we say mercy a whole heck of a lot. Confession is actually reconciliation. And so but also how I would map that onto my 12-step life would be the whole purpose of the practice is to reconcile yourself with God and others, which that's, when you said relationship with God, for me, it's like reconciliation with God, right? It's being reconciled to God and to other. And then those two things have to come hand in hand. It's reconciliation with God and others. And it's, seeing God in all others. And this whole Noahide, like I wasn't really familiar with that. I'd heard it, but hearing, like when Joseph was talking to Father DeYoung, which is, there's this weird thing that like God is God of everyone, Jacob was making that point, in Judaism, it's like, no, God, this is a God for everyone. There is no in, no out. Yes, there is this special designation for Israel, but that doesn't mean that he didn't come for all of creation, and they see that connection very deeply. I hear Jacob talking about that. I hear Chezi talking about that. And then as I'm reading saints and other folks, they're saying the same thing on the Christian side. So there's this thing they say in 12-step programs is don't look for the differences, look for the similarities, right?
Joseph.
And so when you're listening to someone's stories, yeah. And so I'm just spotting all these similarities now. And because I have an apostatic view, what Sherry opened me up to was, and this is why I was primed for the justice sermon, and part of me was my 12-step life was because I had seen a universal God work in people's lives and perform miracle after miracle, year after year.
I would say because of AA, you'd also seen how mercy is justice.
Absolutely. And so, but what this has been able to do is where I used to feel like I had to convert someone so they'd be saved from this eternal fire pit of damnation from this God that was going to punish them. Now that I don't have to worry about that, it all just becomes God of your own understanding. Jewish, Christian, Muslim. I don't have to worry about that at all ever again. I'm confident in that, Sherry.
And really, how could it be anything other than a God of your own understanding? Honestly, I think about this. I think it's like it's impossible for it to be anything other than that.
No, every single person sitting in a pew has a God of their own understanding.
Maybe even two, depending upon the day.
Even two. Or three. No. Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's yeah, we don't have to get into that aspect of it, but I know that would put a number of people off and worry them about this open door.
And you would say it. And so what I see are God seekers. If you're a God seeker, wherever that takes you, just seeking God, if you're a God seeker, then we have a lot to talk about. And I don't care what your tradition or denomination is. I have a union with you as someone who's honestly seeking God to the best of their abilities. Hey, Jacob.
Who let all these heretics on my channel?
Oh yeah. You want to hear heresy? Here's something very heretical. I'm dipping cheese curds in cheese sauce.
Oh my gosh.
Jacob, you look like some kind of like Dominican monk or
Yeah,
something.
everybody says that. So when I'm cold, being bald is difficult
Right. Yeah.
in the winter.
Yeah.
But I actually I had to jump on because Chad said something. I was like, yes. How could it be anything other than the God of your understanding? And like, two, I have a different one every day.
Yeah. And this is
Right.
something you said. This is something you said, Jacob, in the Hebrew Bible study that I participated in with Jason a while ago, a long while ago, actually. That I loved so much, and is also why I said to the girl who said, "Will you pray with me?" Because she wanted to ask Jesus into her heart, right? And I said no, because you said in that Bible study that for you to convert someone, because Judaism is not conversionist, right? For you to convert someone is to commit the act of idolatry, because you're dragging them to the God of your own understanding. Yep. And that is very true. That is a true statement. And that's
I remember watching that too.
That's why it's also like adultery.
Exactly. Yes. And that's why I refused to pray with that girl. Not that I didn't want to see her come to and, know God and enjoy a relationship to God, but not like that. She was moving towards a God of my understanding, or the understanding of a group of people, or whatever,
You could have just given her some LSD.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to say is, and that's why I write G-D. People wonder why I write G-D, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, because I am trying to refer to God, and it reminds me that I don't know how to spell that.
Oh, that's interesting, Jacob, because that is why the Tetragrammaton is not spoken. That is precisely why.
Yeah, because it's ineffable. I keep on saying, like, Cal and I, when Cal came on my channel, it's so funny. Cal and I have like the opposite sleep disorder. So like, I cannot function the hours when he's fully functional, and he can't function. Like we're like night and day,
Literally.
But we found some time and spoke for a little bit in that twilight, and this is what we were talking about, like the ineffable name of God. The Tetragrammaton is self-referential to your inability to refer to God. Like right. It's referring to that itself.
Right.
I like to think of it like God. People like to approach God in like in this way where it's like 1 + 1 = 2, and I think it's more like dog plus bicycle equals airplane. It's very strange.
Sandy, I've seen a lot of Christians have started doing the G-D thing. And I don't see anything wrong with it. I've also seen a lot of Christians start referring to Hashem, which just means the name.
The name, yeah. There's also an aspect to the unutterability of the name, which is incarnational to me too, Jacob, because it's contained within you, right? So it's like God in us, Emmanuel, right? God with us. It's inside of us. And so it's become a part of our very being, which I think is interesting.
Well, so what's the line there, Jacob?
Oh yes, that's of course.
That's the background of my thing, right? It's right. The Tetragrammaton imposed on a human being.
So so I have these I think someone else here said that Sandy said that she was thought about doing the same way, and I have those same inclinations. But you had a video once, I can't remember, maybe it was with Father DeYoung, where what's the difference between being respectful of that, as because I'm a Christian, and not trying to LARP as a Jew? You made that comment once. Yeah.
It's a good question, and frankly, I think that's, to some degree, there's a lot of things you have to decide for yourself. But what we were talking about specifically, so this has always been a touchy issue, and it's funny, but like Father Stephen and I are really talking about trying to figure out what the issue was, because Paul appears, so how he understands Paul within Judaism, this new Paul within Judaism school, is Paul was, in fact, that's what he was doing. He was like, you're a Gentile, that's fine. Don't try to be like, don't stop eating pork because you're like, oh, I want to be more like the Jews. That's not a commandment God gave you at all, right? Like, enjoy your ham sandwich. And honestly, this is why. So a while back, the Babylon Bee had an article. It was a hilarious article about it was like, bacon is proof that there is a God, right? It convinces atheists, right? There is a God, right? And I commented with my, it was on Facebook, and my name on Facebook is in Hebrew, and I commented something like, looks Jewishly at Christians claiming existence of bacon proves God, and it got like 500 likes or something, right? And everybody was laughing because it's funny, right? But like, this is another one of my weird things, right? I actually think that the fact bacon tastes so good is actually part of that. Is like, go ahead, enjoy it, right? I won't eat it. Well, I shouldn't eat it, and I generally avoid it. But that's like, okay, this is a restriction God put on me. He didn't put it on you. And who do you think you are? Like, he made this thing that tastes great, right? Like, dude, not only dig in, like, enjoy it for me, right? And like, all the rabbis say that, and this is something like we generally say in Judaism, that Christians like really chafe at, because it's like, well, why, if it's good for the goose, why isn't it good for the gander, right? And you know, and that's been a major fight between Jews and Christians, which, you know, Father Stephen and this whole school of Paul within Judaism, right? Or these new perspectives on Paul, it is, oh, Paul wasn't preaching against the law or Moses or anything like that. He was just trying to explain to Gentiles, stop with the not eating pork.
It's so relatable. Just because I can't drink alcohol doesn't mean I want it to be gone.
That was the same thing as people in recovery. It's like, hey, you do you. Don't worry about if something causes me an allergy. Like, that's my thing. It's not your thing, you know? Yeah.
So relatable. Maybe that's why we have traditions, like, or like different schools of faith or whatever. Because it's like, I don't know, I was just thinking about that, because it's like, I don't want just anybody coming into an AA meeting saying they're alcoholic when they're not. You know what I mean? And like, okay, so there's something there. It's a relatability. There's there's back to the relational. Interesting. Lost my train of thought, but that's because I'm eating a hamburger.
I hope it's tasty and it has cheese on it.
Yeah, I hope
It's
you
a
do that
mushroom
infused
Swiss
sauce.
burger. It's a mushroom Swiss burger, bro.
No bacon?
No. I like bacon, but it's really not my jam. I'm more of a sausage patty kind of guy.
Man.
Anyway,
Oh, I
sorry to
saw this.
derail.
You didn't derail.
Okay, good.
This is the reason I stayed off for 2.5 hours. Was I knew if I came on, like, people would stop talking.
Well, I didn't stop talking because you came on, Jacob. I have to make lunch.
Well, I don't know. I felt bad because I was trying to talk to Chezi, and I just like, oh wait. So this person left this comment, and that's kind of how I've been feeling lately. So I'm like, I don't even know how to talk or like about a lot of things right now. It's like Sherry said, I'm in the goo phase, converted
You're
to
in the goo.
whateverism or something. That's why so tonight with the Bible study thing too, we're gonna talk about Galatians, and I'm like, whoever else wants to join is more than welcome because
You're going to talk
I don't
about
know. Galatians, right? Is that what we're
That's what we were
Yeah.
thinking about talking about.
Yeah. So if anyone would like to join, because I was really wanting to hear Jacob's thoughts on it later, but then
I'm trying really hard to see what Father Stephen is saying, and
Yeah.
like I don't know what to do with the fact that he said, "Oh, it's the translation," because it's like, well, I certainly don't I certainly don't trust the translators any further than I can throw them. But he's telling me that it's just the translation, but then, and that's why I keep on going back to him. It's like, if you've really got the authentic Christianity, which looks just like Judaism, then why don't how about you convince the Christians instead of the Jews?
Jason, just maybe a helpful suggestion, because I was feeling I did the explicitly the God of my understanding for like 8 years, which looked like just seek God, and the best way to do that is to help others. And so I did that for like a long time. I was very comfortable, and then I was bothered by the question of there must be something deeper, and that came pretty suddenly out of nowhere, because I was really content with the seek by service, right? And I don't know if that's making sense to you, but I was just into action all the time, like go help this other alcoholic, and go do this and go do that. And so I was like, I felt a connectedness with God when I was doing that. And then I was bothered by this deeper question, and then I found something that I didn't know, like I wasn't looking for this, but I was given this new set of eyes, and I have found it more difficult than ever, right? But a big part of it is I've actually stepped away a little more away from the serving others. And so I feel like at the end of the day, when I really want to feel connected, it's something my sponsor says. It says, if you really want to know God, go help his kids. And who are his kids? Everybody you meet, wherever you can be of use. Like, and that's how you're going to, it boils down to this other thing that these crazy ass old timer AAs always say. If you want to know how my relationship with God is, look at how I'm treating the people around me. It's like, that has nothing to do with the name of God. You know what I mean? So I understand the feeling torn apart, because especially when we jump into the brave space, it's a place to kind of be torn apart a little bit. Especially, I mean, it is for me, because I'm just kind of a nutcase. So I'm easily pulled apart. That's why I need to stay grounded in the pragmatics of service to others. Because at the end of the day, I think that's kind of the root system for everything. So
Well, I think there were a few questions in here, and they all kind of are around the same thing. But I think what you're talking about there is like someone said, did Jesus preach a whateverism, or how can you, without saying the name and some of those other things, is like, well, I think Jesus said, well, did you feed the hungry? Did you give water to those who are thirsty? And did you give clothing to those who needed to be clothed? And that's how he did his separation point. And for me, is like how you can exist. Let's just say like someone in a 12-step recovery program, how can they exist is, let's say you're a Christian. I would say, well, if you believe that there's God the Father and then Christ existed, and someone's seeking God and is communing and praying, and they commune and they connect with God, who do you think they're communing and connecting with? Well, if you're a Christian, then you know exactly who that is. And I think, there are Jewish brothers and sisters in AA or whatever that would be, is that you can have your internal thoughts and feelings and the God of your own understanding. And I had all that fully within a 12-step recovery program, but I didn't have to go tell people that they had to believe this, that, or the other thing, because they were being God seekers, and it was showing up in their life. And I figure if you have enough confidence in the God of your understanding, and if you define it as Christ, or if you're Jew or Muslim or whatever that might be, then have that confidence that he has it. He's going to disclose it. Because at the end of the chapter of We Agnostics, I love this line. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. And someone mentioned, didn't Sherry convert me? Well, she asked me a question and pointed me to read something. I then went, feeling moved by that, to go read something, and then read more. She didn't give me any definition of what I should be doing. She's exposed me to something, and then I was off to the races.
I never told him anything because I'm not conversionist. But Jacob, what's the psalm that says, "I look to the hills from whence cometh my help"?
Song of Ascents. Shir Lamalot Asa Einai. El Haharim Ma'ain Yavo Ezri. Ezri Me'im Hasham Ose Shamayim Va'aretz. I will find it.
sing it, sister.
Because
My voice is just so bad.
the reason I ask is because to me that is God. I look to the hills from whence cometh my help. You're looking up, right? You're looking beyond, up and beyond, and if anyone is doing that, who am I to tell them that they're doing the wrong thing? That's God says, "I look to the hills from whence cometh my help," right? And if any man calls on me, right? I don't know what psalm that is, but there's another one there.
121.
Yes, thank you. On the name of the Lord, right? I remember, okay, so the first time I realized that what I thought was true was wrong was when I heard a Muslim man, and he was in India, and he translated the Quran in a way that the people from his region could read the Arabic without making mistakes, because apparently you have to read the Quran in Arabic no matter what country you live in, and you have to read it properly. And there is a language anomaly in India, in this part of India that he was from, which inhibited the proper pronunciation of a certain consonant in Arabic. And so he developed a system in which people could read the Quran from his region without making that mistake. And the reason he did it was because he loved God. That's why. And as he told, through a translator, told his story, and he was a simple man, he was crying. As soon as he talked about why he did it, he started to weep because he wanted God to, be honored. He wanted to honor God by doing that thing. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, this man loves God. This man loves God. Like, that was a huge deal for me to realize that.
Mm-hmm.
straight from the book of Hodor, which is the book I actually read.
The book of
Yeah.
what?
And
Hodor.
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 It's funny. You know, and one they'll talk about the 12-step programs as being a program of attraction rather than promotion. So really what that is, you go in and you be a light in that room. You live it, you're transformed by sharing your stories and who you are and how you interact with people. What happens is people will then come up to you and they'll want to know more about, hey, how do you do that? Like, you said this thing, like what do you, and then all I can do is show them what I do, and that's totally fine, and it's within, there's program stuff, but if they're seeking spiritual stuff, I have to say, well, I'm a Christian and this is what I do. And like, well, I want that. How do I do that? And you're like, well, okay. And you do that. And I've realized it's attraction rather than promotion. And so you just try to be the light and you try to be that change and be that person, and people come to you.
Well, then,
You
yeah,
don't have to. Yeah.
This is the whole "how do you love properly" question that I ask myself. How do I love properly? Right. And I think you love properly when you face God, when you're oriented to God. Then you do organically.
And I'll say something. Jacob will love this, and this is heretical to some Christian people when they hear that their friends or family members are doing this. But one of the best sponsors in my 12-step group is a very wise Jewish man, about 80 years old, and he has about 25 sponsees. And I'd say 80% of them are Christians. But that makes total sense in our world.
Yeah. Well, I know it's joking when I say the book of Hodor, but I'm serious. Hodor was a simple man. He had one task. It was to be of service. He had single-mindedness of being of service. He put others before himself. He reminds me very much of Dog-Headed Saint in that way. And his one job is to hold the door, not so he can get through, but so that he may serve others. And that's, yeah, it's funny, but I'm dead serious on that.
No, that's good. I was like, is he talking? The whole time I was thinking, is he talking about Game of Thrones here? I wasn't sure if you were making a reference to that at first, but yeah, that's really good. Oh.
If you ever get the chance to read the book, I Hold the Door, or not the book, it's a poem by a guy named Sam Shoemaker. It's called I Hold the Door. And if there ever was a creed that I live by, it is that.
Yes, you do, Chad. All right. Well, I've got to get ready to head out here for a little bit. I just wanted to give you some encouragement, Jason, as I was listening to you. And hey,
thanks.
Jacob, thank you for letting us hereticize your channel for hours on end.
He does that. Yeah, I'm probably going to hop off here too. I've been on here a while, so. But I'll be
come
on
back
later
in and listen
with
to
Jacob.
Galatians. Yes, you and Jacob.
Yes, I'm gonna go too.
I'm
All right.
making homemade cauliflower soup.
Ooh,
Ooh.
that sounds really nice. Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
Should I just end the broadcast then?
Yeah, thank you
All right,
guys
okay.
for having me.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah.
for coming on. Yeah, it was. All right, I'll see y'all later.